So, I've contemplated telling this story forever, it seems, because it just sounds not real. But I love this place so much, I've decided to share it here. When I was in high school, I worked at the local Pizza Hut, and I was a closing server, so after closing down the salad bar and mopping, I got out of there pretty late. I had this ritual of texting my dad when I was almost done to let him know that I was almost home, but mostly it was to test and see if him and my mum were awake or not. If they weren't, then I would take the long way home on the old country roads. I lived on a dog breeding farm 20 minutes outside of town, and I would smoke a joint or jam out or whatever. Now, one particular night I decided to do this, and I was riding along a back road about 3 to 4 minutes from my house. This is a road that I know very well, and my bus took this road my whole childhood. One thing to note about my area is that I live in the deep woods of East Texas, so most people who own property put their houses about maybe a quarter to half a mile back on the property, and keep their exposed woods as basically a natural fence and defense as well. So, while you can see a lot of driveways and mailboxes, you can see almost no houses, just pretty much woods with chunks taken out. Now, as I'm driving, I come upon a toolbox, like the ones that sit up in the back of a work truck, smack dab in the middle of the tiny dirt road. I pull up to it and stop and open my door, stepping out but not away from my car. And as I take in my obstacle, I realize my headlights are not the only light on the road. There are headlights, small ones, coming up a driveway that was parallel with the toolbox. I quickly sit back down in my car and close my door till only a crack is open so that in a moment's notice I can close it, go off into the grass and get the heck out of there if need be. When a small riding wheel lawnmower comes out of the trees, and riding it is a man in a full clown suit and a mask with a shotgun laid across his lap. He turns and looks directly through my windscreen and into my eyes and brings the shotgun up out of his lap. Now, I am a country boy through and through. I can smell when I'm somewhere that I'm not wanted, so before he even got the butt of that thing to his shoulder, my car was in drive and in the side ditch of the road. I got out of there, threw my joint out, went home, crawled into bed, and never really spoke about it again. I still don't know what that guy was doing, seeing as this was probably 2018 to 19, so after the killer clown craze. Whether it was a dumb kid or some crazy backwoods man, I'm not really sure, but I'm really glad that I never ran into him again. So, I haven't shared this with anyone because, well, I don't want to seem crazy. I'm just looking for some opinions, I guess, if this was a prank or what. I waited to share this because I was just so freaked out and I didn't know if any of them recognized my car or something. Anyway, so I'm not sure where to start, but I'll do my best. So I live in northern Minnesota in a decent-sized town, 15,000. However, outside of town is extremely rural, with very low populations in the surrounding towns. This happened on the 21st of June, like around 1 or 2 in the morning. So I had training for work down in the Twin Cities at the beginning of that week, and hit the road to head back north at around 9 or so. It's about a 4-hour drive north. The first half of the drive is mostly highway, and then the second half is more of a rural 2-lane road, but still a common road traveled. I'm not sure if any of you have driven in Minnesota, but there are deer everywhere, so I was staying pretty attentive on keeping my eyes peeled for something possibly running across the road. What to look for are their eyes when it's dark, as they tend to stick out in the ditch and you're able to spot them before passing them. So I was on a stretch of road without a town for about 30 miles in all directions, when I noticed a glow in the woods, which was some type of bonfire inside the woods. But also there was a group of people standing in the ditch forming a line towards the woods. I thought that they were deer at first, These are dense woods too, big pine trees, so you can see into the woods fairly easily. I slowed down because I guess I thought that maybe they needed help or whatever. I'm going to try my best to explain it because my headlights were facing forward, so I could only make out one person clearly, and couldn't see too much detail for the other people, as they were farther away in the ditch closer to the woods. But they were lined up in a row facing the road, but forming a line heading into the woods. They had their heads down looking at the ground, but for each person that was closer to the woods, they were closer to the ground. First person straight up, and then the next looked somewhat hunched over, and then I think the people close to the woods were kneeling. It was hard to make out their age, but I had to guess maybe middle-aged, but I'm not positive. I really could only make out the first person's outfit, but they had on what looked like a white robe with a black sash around it. The sash had a symbol of what looked like a robot, or some type of figurine with its hands facing out, sitting down. There was other imagery on the sash, but I was only stopped for maybe 10 seconds trying to process everything. Also, these people never acknowledged me, as far as I'm aware anyway, just didn't even move whatsoever. I was pretty much frozen with fear, as obviously this is quite abnormal and nothing like I've ever witnessed or heard about here. So I promptly left after I got my focus regained on the road. I tried telling myself that it was some hoax or maybe some different people camping, but it was just too odd, and it just seemed like that was not the case. So I guess I'm just wondering if anyone else has experienced something like this or heard about it. And if you have, and if you know anything, well, what is it? I've lived in many haunted houses all my life, each with their own experiences and stories, but for the most part human in nature. This, though, was the first time that I experienced something that I would call inhuman. My dad was in the army at the time and had been stationed to a base in South Carolina. He found a house for rent and showed us pictures of it. It was a single story at the end of a roundabout in the middle of the woods. You can see the other house off in the distance through the trees. I looked at the pictures, and whenever I looked at the pictures of the outside, a voice in my head would start screaming at me, "It's in the woods, it's in the woods." Nothing on the inside, just the outside. When we got there, as we were unpacking, a cop pulled up too. I never got out of the car, but talked to my mum through the window about how he knew the previous owners and just wanted to check on things. We never saw the cop again after that, but it was weird. Anyway, whenever I go outside, I get the sensation that something was hiding in the tree line and that it wanted me to follow it. I felt like it was trying to be playful and mischievous. I would also see figures walking by the windows and heard scratching from outside even. One night, I woke up hearing something moving around outside. I went to look outside, peeking through the blinds, and I saw something crouching in front of the window. If it was standing, it would have been on two legs and at least 7 feet tall, given I could see the silhouette of shoulders and knees. I could also see that whatever it was covered in fur. Obviously, I was pretty freaked out. Days later, my parents had taken my brother to the airport as well, and I was home alone. I was doing laundry, and I saw that my room was brighter than normal for some reason. I figured that I must have left my bedside lamp on, so I went to go and turn it off. I stood in my doorway and saw that my lamp was off. Looking up, my ceiling light, which had never worked since we moved in, was on. I texted my mum asking if she had the light fixed, and she said no. That was really weird because we checked that later as well, and that line was broken. Eventually, I left for army basic training, but my mum kept up to date on what was going on there, and she said that she was hearing the scratches and the noises now that I used to hear. One night, she was talking to my dad by the door and said that they both heard someone run up on the porch and rattle the door handle. My dad whipped open the door, but when he did, there was nothing there. We never got any answers to what was in the woods or the house, but it was my first experience with something that honestly felt inhuman. This incident happened a few months ago while I worked at a former police department here in the southeastern US. I was a patrol officer there, and our shifts at the time were 12 hours, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I enjoyed working nights, a lot of fun and crazy things happened, which really kept things interesting. The night started as it usually does as well. A shift briefing, pass on general pre-shift shenanigans. I'd say about the first 3 to 4 hours were pretty normal as well. Wrecks, domestic disturbances, and the likes. But I'd say maybe 11:30 to 11:45, we received a call for a severe wreck. A black sedan rolled over and was upside down in the ditch. The callers who called it never stopped, but they said that they didn't see anyone in or around the vehicle. I was the second one on the scene, my sergeant being the first. Now, I have been to gruesome scenes before, gunshot and stabbing victims, welfare checks to find decomposing bodies, and other terrible scenes. I was generally okay with handling them, but nothing could have prepared me for this scene. So in the car was an infant's child seat ripped from the restraints. My first hope was there wasn't a child in the car. On further investigation, though, the front shield wasn't even attached to the car anymore. It happens a lot in rollovers, but about 30 feet away, in the knee-deep high grass, I saw a depression from what looked to be something displacing the grass. As I approached, I saw the body of a woman, 28 years old, based on a driver's license, and we recovered her. She was in and out of consciousness and hardly being able to speak. We had a lot of trouble with her. When I found her, fire was rolling on the scene, and I radioed to them that I'd found the victim. And despite the noise, I heard distinctly, "Where is my baby?" When I looked back down at her, she was staring at me, and my heart sank, because it was then that I realized that there was a child somewhere in either the vehicle or ejected somewhere out here. I immediately began searching the field after telling my sergeant that a child was also in the vehicle. We searched, and eventually, well, unfortunately, you get the drift. That was the moment that something in me just changed as well. After the mother and the child were transported, we learned the mother succumbed to her wounds. A single car, 2 fatality wrecks. I was placed on admin leave and had to speak with our psychiatrist for several days until they deemed it okay for me to return to shift. My first night back was routine calls that we usually had, the same as the second night. The third night, though, we received a call, once again a wreck, on the same road as before, in the same manner as well. I was closer to the location and arrived at the scene first. Mind racing, heart going 100 miles an hour. The memory suddenly flooded back from that first collision, but as I rolled up to the scene, there was nothing. No wreck, just an empty field and darkness. My blue lights were on, and so were my scene lights. Confused if I was at the right location, I radioed my dispatch to confirm with them, and they acknowledged that I was in the right place. I scanned, and nothing was out of the norm. Nothing was disturbed. The ground looked the same as it had been forever. It was then that I thought that perhaps this was a really cruel prank call or something. Maybe an error on the caller. So I got in my patrol car, turned my blue lights off, and prepared to drive further down the road to have a little look around. As I placed my car into drive, though, I noticed movement out of my peripherals, but when I looked, there was just inky darkness. I shook it off and I drove off. I never did find the second supposed accident, and I ended up being told to clear up as other calls were waiting. But later that night, when things began to calm down, at around 3:30 in the morning, I decided to drive down that road once again, just to take a look. As I turned left onto the road, I honestly felt as if something nudged my right arm. Instantly, my hair on my arm stood on end and I got the chills. No one else was in the car with me, but I tried to rationalize it. I continued on down the road. As I approached the original wreck scene, I saw off to the side of the road what appeared to be someone standing in the distance in the field. Despite the distance and being in the shadows of my headlights, I could tell what clothes that they were wearing. Blue jeans and a light shirt, but what caught me off guard was I could see the figure holding something in its arms. As I got closer, I slowed down to a crawl, trying to use my spotlight to see better, but when I went back to look again, there was nothing there. Something in me told me to stop the car, and I did. As I got out, I looked into the field with my flashlights from the roadside. Behind me, and on the other side of the road from the field, was a wooded plot of land. And from there, I could hear what sounded like footsteps, but lighter. This was late autumn, and there were a lot of leaves on the ground, so there should have been more noise if someone was walking around on freshly fallen leaves like that. I informed my dispatch that I was stepping out of my vehicle and where. As I ventured out into the field, I found the original spot where the mother laid. Gauze, gloves, and various other medical bandages still laid there intertwined in the long grass. Despite being late autumn, the temperature was sitting around 55 degrees. But as I approached, I could feel the temperature suddenly drop. I got the chills again, goosebumps, and a feeling as if I was suddenly being watched. I scanned again, and still nothing. As I left the spot and began walking back to my car, looking down as to not trip as I went, I looked up and my heart sank. Standing on the driver's side of my car, illuminated ever so faintly, but not enough to see a face, was a woman, holding, clearly, a child in her arms. It was clear too, the same clothes as before, but just obscured in the face. I called out to her and continued my way to her, trying to shine my flashlight at her, but as I did, I saw her step back into the shadows, my flashlight seemingly not able to pierce that darkness. As I got to my car, I called out again, searched with my flashlight, even going as far as turning my scene lights on, but nothing. Paranoid, I searched my vehicle, searched the wood line, and the feeling of dread became just too strong. And eventually, I got in my car and I just left. Shaken up by the experience, I called my sergeant and told him what happened. PTSD is what he said, and I was told to take the next several days off and to speak with the counselor. It really messed me up. After everything was said and done though, I did return to work a week later. I just never went back down that road by myself while employed there. Several other people witnessed the same experience after I left, even people who were never even on the scene during the wreck. All described the same woman holding a child in the field, in that tree line. Back in 2009, when I was in my early 20s, I'd often go on late night walks with a friend. We lived in a seaside town in the UK, and our walks would take us around the outskirts of the town. We only drank on weekends, and these particular events took place midweek whilst we were stone cold sober, for what it's worth. So, we set off from my mum's house at around 9 p.m, and after walking for about 30 minutes or so, we stopped to pet a cat that was here. We were beside a building that had a big glass front. I was stroking the cat when my friend said, "What the? That's creepy. Look in that window." I glanced up and There was an old man sat bolt upright in a chair at the back of the room in complete darkness, just staring outside. We watched him for a while and he was completely still. My friend even pondered whether the guy was dead or maybe a mannequin or something. We eventually moved on, and after that our night got even stranger though. You see, we made our way past the town's dump, outdoor clothes, around the town's boating lake and down towards the estuary. It would have been nearing 10:30 at this point. We wandered past some really lavish houses that overlooked the place and then arrived at a narrow wooded line that goes right down to the estuary. Normally on this walk, we just ignore the lane and keep going past the houses, to the top of the road and back into town. But on this night, we decided to wander down to the water's edge. As soon as we set foot into the lane, it immediately got darker due to the tree coverage on each side. The only source of light was at the end of the lane. We were completely silent, just sort of trudging down the lane and feeling really horrible. It was cold and the apprehension sort of came out of nowhere, I guess, but as we got to within about 20 yards of the water, we both stopped at exactly the same time with no communication. I was suddenly staring at a shape that I could make out down the bottom of the lane. At first I thought it was a signpost, but as my eyes focused, it seemed to me more like a broad figure, and it had a big head that stood about 7 to 8 feet in height. I was trying to rationalize in my head when my friend broke the silence and said, "Do you see that thing down there?" I replied with a yes, and without any further communication, we both turned around and dashed back up the lane. It was only 20 seconds or so until we got to the street, but the whole time the back of my neck was cold and I felt like I was being chased. Once back on the street, we began walking, thankful for the streetlights lining the pavement. At this point, we started talking again. Both not only saw the same thing, but we also felt the cold and sensation of being chased. We both remarked on how, without communicating, we both instinctively turned tail and got out of there as fast as we could. We both described seeing the same eerie shape of what appeared to be something bipedal and absolutely massive, shrouded in darkness like a shadow. Yet there were no shadows down there because of the tree coverage. It was almost blacker than a shadow, if anything. But there was like a density to that dark shape as well, like a void. In any case, we went back to my place and we just watched some South Park to wind down. My mate then left and I insisted on him texting me when he got home, which as two young men is something that we never did. Male privilege and all that, I guess. Now, I had an appointment at a mobile retinal scanning clinic the next day. This happened to be taking place in a car park next to the house that we saw the old man in. I went to this appointment and met up with another friend who lived nearby. As we rounded the corner, I glanced at the house that we were at the night before, and it was now completely empty. No furniture or anything. I mentioned to my friend about what I'd seen the night before, and she said, "Well, that's weird because my mum used to clean for the old couple that lived there, but they died a few years ago and it's been empty ever since." Man, when I tell you that goosebumps were all over my body, that is a complete understatement. In the 90s, my dad bought an old house that had a barn attached to it. A lot of houses in Germany, especially in the smaller villages, are like this. The first few years were totally fine as well. In 2003, my dad started to remodel or rebuild the house, and that was when it started. First, it was just weird little things, such as banging, things falling over, water faucets being turned on, toilets flushing. We just shrugged it off saying that it's an old house and blah blah blah. I never felt comfortable there, to be honest though. I always heard something right above my room, the attic, and sometimes it sounded like furniture being moved. but there were only 2 to 3 old chairs and a really heavy old oak closet up there. It was huge as well. Dad always told us that it was probably just squirrels. Pretty big squirrels, if you ask me. Well, time went by and we didn't think too much of it. I met my now husband on MySpace and we Skyped every night. Due to the time difference, 6 hours, one morning my now husband said, "Oh, they're up early." And I said, "Who?" He said that someone just walked through the hallway. My heart was about to explode when I heard that. No one was up at 3 in the morning, and as I turned to the hallway, the whole fixture of the living room curtain, which was mounted to the wall, just fell off. I got pretty scared by that. He knew about all of this stuff though because I had told him about it, and he said just go and check if everyone is asleep and just lay down. I hung up, and as soon as I was upstairs, I checked everyone and they were all sleeping. From there too, it kept getting worse and worse. In the morning, all kitchen cabinets and drawers were open. Basement door was open, and that door was always locked because it had an old well down there. At this point, everyone got and felt very uneasy. It even happened when we had visitors over too. Lights flickering, doors slamming shut. One of my mum's friends is very spiritual, and her best friend is Native American. And she said she talked to her about it and that she would be more than happy to come over and do a cleansing. My mum said absolutely, but I called the Catholic priest and I'm waiting for him to call back. He called and said that it wasn't the first time that he was called to this address, and also that he won't be coming back. He seemed honestly pretty upset that the sellers didn't mention why they never kept the tenants for longer than a few months. He apologized and just said that there was nothing that he could do. My mum asked him then if at least he knows what happened or what it is. He said that all he knows is that around the 1900s, a farmer and his wife owned the house and the land. The wife always wanted children but was never able to get pregnant. They were both lovely people apparently, but one day her husband left the house to go to the market, and a little while later his wife heard lots of screaming. Someone banged on her door, and her husband sadly was run over and apparently died. Ever since that day, she became bitter, especially unfriendly to kids, and didn't talk to anyone anymore. Sadly, she did die bitter as well and alone in that house. Mum was like, "Oh, that's great, thank you." And after that for a while, nothing seemed to happen all of a sudden. Everything just went quiet and almost back to normal. Until my sister-in-law announced that she was pregnant. And it all started over, but this time, much more aggressive. Windows fully open now, dishes flew out of the cabinets, stuff was thrown down the stairs, and the closer it got to the birth, the crazier it got too. It got so bad that both of my sisters slept with me in my room. One night, I heard my brother scream as well. We ran into his part of the house, and he said that a shadow figure came down the stairs from the attic. The stairs to the attic were in this bathroom, and went right under the baby crib, and it tipped over. From that night on, we all slept together in the living room. The next day, my mum called her friend again. At this point, we were absolutely terrified. Even my dad, who's still the biggest skeptic ever, was pretty scared. Next day, this beautiful lady came over with Mum's friend, and she looked at us and said that it's feeding off of y'all's fear. Truthfully, too, we hadn't slept right in months. She asked if we wanted to wait outside or come inside. I assumed that we were all scared for her, and we all told her that we'd go in with her. But before we went in, she, I guess, cleansed us or blessed us in her beautiful native language, and gave us some sort of bean to hold or put in pocket to protect us. I wish I could remember the name of that, but she walked in and said, "Wow, it is strong and it doesn't like me." We went from room to room. She had a tray with like several different items on it. Sage, obviously, and something that was already burning. A feather, I think, and something else as well, but I don't remember. Anyway, as we approached my brother's studio or apartment section, she kept getting louder and louder, and I didn't understand her native language, but in between she would tell us that it's trying to hide and it feels cornered. The next stop was the attic. One by one we started to go up, and all of a sudden the door swung wide open and a 2x4 board came full speed flying right towards us and almost hit my brother-in-law right in the head. And then there was this loud boom. It just felt like the whole house shook as well, like an earthquake. My siblings went out with my dad and brother-in-law. Once we were up there, we see the big oak cabinet was pushed over, and the 2x4 was ripped out of the wooden structure from the roof. The lady got pretty hectic at this point, and then said that it's not here anymore. It must be downstairs. The only room that we hadn't been in at this point was the laundry room. She went in there alone, and she was really loud at this point. In fact, everything felt so loud. After what felt like a really long time too, she came out and said that apparently it put up a fight. She had ashes all over her and looked really drained. And she said that apparently it kept blowing the ashes on her, trying to put the fire out off the tray. I'll never forget that day, ever. This kind lady as well didn't want anything for her work. She came back a few days later to tell us that the lady who owned the house was trying to protect us, especially my sister-in-law, since the thing was after her unborn baby. I moved to Tennessee a few years later. My siblings went to college across Germany, and so my parents sold the house, peaceful as it could have ever been. A couple of days ago, someone actually broke into my house while I was asleep. I work night shifts, so sleeping during the day is pretty much something that you have to learn to get used to. At around 6:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was a loud knocking sound coming from outside, and my dog's going absolutely ballistic. For reference, I live on a farm out in the middle of nowhere. My closest neighbor is like half a mile away, but anyway, I somewhat wake up, but don't really think anything of it since my neighbors like to shoot their guns, and this was during hunting season as well. As I start falling back asleep, my heart started fluttering weird, like I knew something wasn't right. And that was when I heard footsteps throughout the house. The dogs are still barking, but starting to quiet down. That's when I really began to worry, because I thought my dogs would protect me in a time like this, but a fat chance of that. The footsteps stop on the other side of my bedroom door, and just don't move. I think that this is how I'm going to die, and although I had a weapon in my room, I knew that I couldn't get to it without being heard. It felt like an eternity before the steps moved around and towards my brother's room. Rustling could be heard loudly through the house and things being thrown. I knew then that they were in my brother's room, and some of his friends are into like seedy situations, and I knew it had to be one of them. I heard the footsteps coming back to my door, and the doorknob handle moves. It was then that I immediately turned my back towards the door and closed my eyes tight. I also had a hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. The door opens, but that's it. Then he leaves as a car drives down the road. I finally bucked up my courage and get out of bed. Everything in the house, except for my brother's room, was undisturbed. I immediately called my brother and asked if any of his friends were coming over. He said not that he knew of, and I told him what happened. He got off the phone with me to start calling around. I went back to bed and noticed that I still had my window cracked open from earlier, and realized that I had my sheet off of me wearing only a t-shirt to bed. And if it was who I think it was, this wasn't a random event. You see, one of my brother's friends has always had eyes for me, and the fact that he saw me sleeping and in just a shirt kind of makes me freak out a bit. Whether or not he just took something out of my brother's room or knew that I was home alone sleeping before having to work later that night, I don't actually know. I'll share an update though when I hear from my brother. You move out to the country to get away from activity of the city life and let your guard down, but that's when something like this happens, right? Sometimes country life, it isn't so safe after all. So I've been having sleep paralysis issues for a long time, like since I was little, and I would often have nightmares that lead to sleep paralysis. I don't think that my sleep paralysis is a normal kind too. Like, I think something paranormal is happening. And when I search the things I've experienced on Google, nothing ever really pops up. Nothing useful anyway. So I've decided that after waking up from another experience, and I think it was the most horrifying experience I'd ever had, I was going to share it here and try to get some answers from all of you guys. So, this all started when I was about 5. I was playing dress up alone in my room, when suddenly my soccer ball rolled out of my closet. I picked it up and went to put it back. I walked into my closet and put it on the shelf where it was. When I walked out, I went back to playing, but in the corner of my eye, I noticed something strange. I turned to look at it, and it was a pitch-black, tall and skinny humanoid figure. It was hunched a bit since it was too tall to stand up all the way, and it just stood there, menacingly. After some seconds of us just seemingly staring at each other, I guess it just hit my 5-year-old mind that this thing isn't supposed to be here. I quickly ran out of the room and ran into my older brother's room and stayed there until it was my bedtime, and then he forced me to go back into my room. I laid there trying not to fall asleep since I was so scared of that thing, but eventually I ended up falling asleep. When I fell asleep, I had a dream that I don't remember what the dream was about, but I remember waking up absolutely terrified. I was so scared, in fact, that I went into my parents' bathroom and just slept in the bathtub. My parents weren't home at this time. They were away for a few days, and I don't remember where they went. Ever since then, too, I've been having nightmares and sleep paralysis, but the odd thing is that I only ever have the nightmares and the sleep paralysis when I sleep in my bedroom. When I sleep anywhere else, like the couch or my parents' room, the guest room, wherever, my brother's room even, it never happens. When I have these nightmares, though, they take place usually in a darker version of my bedroom, and it's like I'm stuck in one place and I can't move. I also see that thing that I saw, the black figure, and it just stares at me until I wake up and have the sleep paralysis. When I have sleep paralysis, I'm unable to move at all, and that includes opening my eyes. Like, I'll try to open my eyes, but I just cannot do it. And I feel a weight on my back as well. I sleep on my stomach. I'll hear a voice whispering, but I'm never able to understand what it's actually saying. I also hear what sounds like maybe a broken music box. It'll be playing on repeat, but it sounds old and broken. I'm also able to feel something touching me, like scratching, pinching, choking, and even stabbing. It's like someone is wrapping their hands around my neck and trying to choke me. When it's stabbing, it feels like something is trying to cut my neck open, like shoving a sharp object into my neck. Whenever it happens, it always tries to hurt my neck, like that's the only place that it goes after. Anyway, today as I'm sharing this, I've had the most terrifying experience with my nightmares or sleep paralysis that I'd ever had. I had just got done studying and decided that I was going to take a nap. Originally, I planned to sleep in the guest room since I've been sleeping there for about a year now, due to my sleep paralysis. But my parents wouldn't allow me to do this and said that I needed to get over whatever strange fear I have of my bedroom. I tried to nap on the couch instead, but again they wouldn't let me. So I went into my room and tried to sleep. Eventually I did fall asleep, and that's when I woke up in a dream. I could immediately tell that it was a dream as well, and that's never actually happened to me before. I was in a dark room that looked like my bedroom, and I heard growling sounds. I was trying to wake myself up, but the growling sounds just got louder until eventually I did wake up. When I woke up, I realized that I was having sleep paralysis, and I got pretty frightened. I heard that broken music box again playing, and I felt like I was about to cry. I felt that some weight of someone sitting on my back and hands wrapped around my neck and started choking me again. I also heard a voice, but it wasn't the same whispering voice this time. It was screaming at me, saying that it was going to kill me, and that I wasn't welcome here and I needed to leave. Like, this time I actually heard what it was saying. This went on for over a minute, and usually when this happens, it only lasts for like 20 to 30 seconds. It's never happened for this long before. When I finally was able to move, I got up and ran to the guest room immediately, and I just bawled my eyes out. I really don't know what to do as well. I've tried explaining it to my parents, but they don't believe me, and they think that I'm making it up for attention. The only one who actually believes me is my brother. He slept in my room once just to see if the same thing would happen to him while I slept in the guest room, and as expected, yep, it happened to him too. At this point, it's official that my room is being haunted by some weird demon or something. And I'm here to ask all of you, what do I do? After this, I'm never stepping foot in that room again, unless it's absolutely needed, and I'm definitely never sleeping in there ever. My brother offered to help me move my stuff into the guest room this weekend, which I'm really thankful for, but the only issue is that I have to convince my parents to actually let us do that. I've been a CNA for 6 years now, and I've had lots of paranormal experiences during the night shift, between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. The first place I worked, I got a call lights in a room where someone had recently passed away in. I was the only person working in that part of the building. When I got to the room, it was locked like usual. When I unlocked it and went in, the cord on the wall was pulled and needing to be reset, but no one was actually in there. The same place had an activity room as well, with a couple of armchairs and a couch. I was laying on the couch one night playing on my phone and had my pager sitting next to me when it suddenly flew off the couch so fast, like someone had actually smacked it as hard as they could. That same place also had a basement that had motion detection lights in the rooms. I walked into the first room to grab something, and when I walked back out, every single room in the hallway had the lights on. You could always hear people running up and down the halls or even across the ceiling, but if you ever went to investigate, no one was ever there. But the scariest time, though, was when I was working a bunch of double shifts and decided to take a nap in the break room in the basement during my lunch break. I had sleep paralysis where I was stuck on the couch, and there was an old man in the corner of the room watching me, but keeping his face hidden from me, it seemed. I tried to move and get away and managed to break free and run out of the room a couple of times, only to suddenly appear back on the couch all of a sudden. I know that sounds weird, but it's really the only way I can describe it. However, the second my break ended at 30 minutes, I was suddenly able to move. I sat up, and as soon as I did, the lights went out. They were on a timer though, and really should have turned off after 5 minutes, but they seemed to stay on the entire time until my break had ended, as if they had detected the person in the corner the whole time. The last crazy thing that I experienced was at a news center that I was working at. I would always hear doors opening and slamming shut, or a lady's voice yelling at the end of the hallway, "Is anybody here?" but when I'd check all the rooms, everyone would be asleep in their beds. At that same facility, I went into a room to help someone use the bathroom. When I got him sat up on the edge of his bed, I had him grab my arms and I said, "I'm going to help you stand up so that we can use the toilet real fast, okay?" And a woman right behind me, almost as if she was leaning over my right shoulder, said, "Okay," in reply. I whipped around like nobody's business, but when I did, obviously nobody was there. Now, I know experiences like this aren't uncommon at these facilities, but I'm wondering if any of you guys have any similar experiences, even if it is completely unrelated to these sorts of places. So, according to what I've been told, I wasn't born alone. I had another spirit with me, and I'll explain how I found that out. So I've never felt like I was from Earth, and I never really felt human as well. I always worried about where I came from and what is my mission on Earth. Mind you, this is when I was a kid. I don't think like this anymore. I was a very spiritual kid though, and one of those kids who say weird things to their mum about their past lives and all that. I've also had vivid dreams and have had deep interests in them as well. So keep this info handy as it will become important. Now, I was also constantly afraid of being watched growing up. I used to worry that a spirit was watching me when I went to sleep. With time, I randomly started to worry that a ghost girl was sitting on my bed and watching me, and it felt a bit too real for me at that time. I had many nightmares that someone was chasing me, especially a dark figure, and when I woke up, I usually run out of my room. Then, when I was about 11, this dark figure actually caught me for the first time. I was forced to look at its face. It was a girl, similar to the one that I had imagined sitting on my bed. She held me in place and asked me to do something for her, and if I did it, she would let me move away. I didn't even listen before agreeing because I was so scared. She laughed and jumped at me, which made me wake up in my first sleep paralysis. I remember looking around with just my eyes, unable to move my body, and seeing the girl laying down next to me. After that, I constantly had dreams about her as well, and not only dreams. Sometimes I could interact with her by just closing my eyes. I would get into a sort of trance and she manipulated my mind, it felt like. And yes, I know that sounds really weird, but that is the best way that I can describe what actually happened. If I closed my eyes and I imagined her, my imagination would soon become extremely vivid, almost like reality, I guess. And she controlled herself in my imagination, like I couldn't control what she did in the way that I imagined her. She would often just smile and give me jump scares, literally jumping and grabbing me. It always left me with a weird sensation all over my body. I felt as if I was vibrating, in fact. I also had a few out-of-body experiences. One time I was just sitting down and stood up, but instead of standing up with my physical body, I seemed to have been standing up in my spirit, I guess. I turned around and saw myself, then re-entered my own body. It was a very scary moment, and there were a bunch of people around me when it happened, so I just had to pretend like nothing happened. That's how I remember it anyway. I was still a kid, like I said before, and it could have another explanation, I know that. Anyway, after a few years, my mum called a medium to help me with my situation. I honestly didn't understand much of what happened in my sessions with that medium, but for some reason, the girl just stopped appearing to me after them. My mum didn't explain it all to me until I was a bit older. But she told me that the medium found out that the girl that I interacted with was apparently a spirit from a past life that I'd had, someone who loved me and she was still attached to me, so she couldn't move on. She wanted to stay with me, so she chased and grabbed me. That would explain why I was so spiritual and sort of felt disconnected from the world. I had someone from my past life right there, always by my side. I don't know about any of that, but what I do remember is that after that medium arrived and I did whatever I did with her, everything just seemed to stop, which is a bit weird, right? What do you guys think? Do you think that there's any validity to these stories and these things that happened to me? Or do you think that it was all in my head? So something really weird happened to me last night, and I wanted to share or get some opinions. So I had my longtime bestie E over last night for a bit of a chill session. She and I have been friends since around 6th grade and spent a lot of time at each other's childhood homes. We grew up in an area that was formerly a Native American settlement, and across from her house was an old structure specific to a certain tribe of her region, and a museum or welcome center on the acres and acres of protected land. The land that she lived on undoubtedly was also sacred land that had been pieced off and sold. Now, we had many experiences in her house, and she and I got to reminiscing about them last night. Her sister had brought up an incident where E and I had been smoking in her room out of the window. E's bedroom was upstairs, and this window sort of looked down at her sister's room on the ground floor. Her sister's room had a sliding glass door to it. E and I peacefully sang along to Kid Cudi as V, her sister, came charging up the stairs screaming. She burst into the room, and we guiltily sort of looked at her, bowl in hand, like she had come up to bust us for being delinquents. Instead, though, she yelled at us for scaring her. We had no idea what she could have been referring to, as we'd been upstairs minding our own business the whole time. But apparently V had heard knocking on a sliding glass door and called to us, but there was no answer. She then heard something scream and pound on her door inside, and then run away. She assumed that it was us, and all three of us after that. She assumed it was us, and all three of us spent the rest of the night pretty terrified after that. All three of us remembered that incident well as well, and I mentioned to E that I'd had an experience in the house that I'd always thought that it was a dream that I didn't think that I'd told her about. She asked what it was, and I told her that one night after we'd fallen asleep playing PlayStation on the couch, I had awoken in the middle of the night to see a figure walking through her yard, out the bay window. She paused, looked concerned, and asked what the figure looked like. I told her that it looked like, in my estimation, an old hag, and at that, she gasped, because apparently she had been awake that night too, and had seen the same thing. She hadn't said anything because she didn't think anyone would believe her. My husband was shocked that we had never actually talked about it, and the energy was palpable. We both were on the verge of tears when we were discussing this, and it's been probably 15 years and we just never talked about it. I really didn't want to accept what I had actually seen, and I still don't. I acknowledge the validity of the paranormal, but that thing was like a Scooby-Doo villain. It was just too vivid to have been real. I can still picture it very vividly in my mind, and it was not a brief encounter by any means. As I peeked over the back porch, trying to appear asleep, an old crone came staggering out of the wooded, swampy area toward the window. She wore dark, tattered clothing. She came all the way to the window and stood in it, looking at us. I sort of clenched my eyes shut and tried to pretend like I hadn't seen her, and I didn't open my eyes again until the morning. I do sometimes wonder if maybe someone was pranking us the whole time, but the list of suspects is very thin. Also, who is waiting out in the dark like that to scare two preteen girls that they don't know, dressed like a SFX swamp hag? In any case, we both seem to very vividly remember it. This was also in the time before viral shock pranks, so we just really don't know what to make of it. When I was between 10 and 13, I don't remember exactly. One day I stayed home from school because I felt a little bit unwell. I was laying in bed and I clearly remember seeing two people float over me. One was a male dressed as a soldier. He was wearing head-to-toe camouflage, including a hat and brown boots. Behind him was a woman with long dark hair wearing a wedding dress. They floated over me and just went straight past me, and they were sort of slightly transparent, I guess, and I only saw them for about 3 seconds and then they were gone. I remember being extremely spooked, but quite quickly writing it off as a dream. I never really thought much of it after that, but I never forgot about it either. Anyway, a couple of years ago, so about 5 or 7 years after I saw them, I was having a conversation with my mum about paranormal activity and ghosts. She was telling a story about how the lampshade in my brother's room once was swinging like crazy, even though nobody was moving. The doors, the windows were closed, etc., and there was just no explanation for it. And this is when I told her my story about seeing the soldier and the woman. She found it fascinating, and this is when she told me, before we lived in our house, an old couple lived there. The man was apparently a soldier who fought in World War II. They lived here until they passed away. And I mean, like what, right? I mean, our house is over 100 years old, pretty common in England. But I had no idea about any of this until this moment. Ever since I found that out, though, I truly believe what I saw was real. Maybe I did dream it, but even if it was a dream, I really think that it must have been them. Also, I want to add as well that the lampshade in my bedroom, it swings constantly. No window or door open, no one moving in the room, no fan or anything. Everything in the room is still, but my lampshade, it swings often as well, switching directions and going faster, then slower. I fully believe that there is something living in that house, and I'm okay with it, I guess. I mean, they've never caused me any harm. I just wanted to share my story, though, and see if anyone has experienced anything similar. I find it all really fascinating, and if I hadn't have experienced what I had, I probably wouldn't believe either, but now I just cannot after what I've seen. So I've played with Ouija boards numerous times with different friend groups, and nothing interesting has ever really happened. We'd either get no response or it would just spell out random things. This past Thanksgiving, a friend came over and after eating dinner, we wanted to give the Ouija board thing a try. Just a quick note about us too. My friend is an ex-Mormon who doesn't believe in the paranormal, and although I'm open to the idea of the paranormal phenomena, I have yet to personally experience anything that would be truly convincing, I guess you could say. Before beginning though, we set our intentions to speak with positive spirits only, and we agreed not to do anything obnoxious or weird like making fun of the board or spirits or asking questions that we shouldn't, like when will I die, how will I die, etc. And to my surprise, the planchette began moving shortly after we asked our first question, and the connection seemed consistent from there. The atmosphere was relaxed and warm, and among an array of questions, we asked questions about the individual that we were communicating with, and we also asked questions about ourselves that we knew the other person wouldn't know, and the board answered accurately. We were trying to think of some more questions when it started spelling out, "Help me," but with 2 L's. I know that this sounds so cliche, and if I ever write horror stories, I'm absolutely using this in a plot, but the chill environment became a bit eerie following this, and we asked with slight apprehension, "How can we help you?" And it responded, "Quit." My friend looked genuinely nervous, and I felt on edge as well. We agreed to listen to the response, but only after we asked one final question. We asked if it could share why it wanted us to quit. The first letters were SH, and I assumed it was going to tell us to shut up, but instead of going to the U, it ended up spelling Shatan, like Shatan. My friend looked confused, and I asked her if she knew what the word meant, and she said that she didn't. I then told her that it could mean Satan in Arabic and explained that it's a classification of jinn in Islam. If the board meant Satan, as in the pitchfork dude, then we both already knew what that meant. Either way, it wasn't good, and we kept our promise to stop after that last question. We made sure to thank the spirit for talking to us, and we said goodbye before closing the session. We know about the effect or explanations about connecting with the subconscious, but I think that it was particularly eerie that, 1, it started responding as we tried to think of more questions. 2, we both thought the board would spell out shut up as it went to SH, but instead it spelled Shatan. And all in all, it was a really interesting experience, but perhaps superstitiously, I almost feel like it was a warning, like it was warning me to not keep messing with the Ouija board, provided that it truly was something supernatural and not that subconscious stuff. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts about what you think about all of this and whether or not I should give it a go again. I grew up in a tiny town with a long history. Think a bit west of North California, Gold Rush land. As to not dox myself, I'll make sure to keep it vague, but the house that I grew up in was about 120 years old. Now, as a child, I frequently complained to my mum about the faceless man in our living room. He was a completely black figure, with somewhat distinguishable features, but he was just so shrouded in darkness that you couldn't really tell who he was. It was kind of like a Victorian silhouette in that you could make out the approximate size and shape of his facial features, but they were darkened and blurred beyond any real recognition, outside of a broad approximation of certain features. I saw him in the living room almost every other day. Seeing him never really went away as I got older as well, but I developed significant sleep issues when I was 14, so my family chalked it up to hallucinations from sleep deprivation. I was tired of feeling crazy, even when I did get adequate sleep, so the faceless man became a bit of a secret. I would just rush past the room that he'd be in and try to stay out of the living room as much as possible. I, weirdly enough, became used to his presence despite how horrified I was of him. Nearly 10 years after I first saw him, my family moved out of that home, and so strangely, I never saw him again, the faceless man, after that. I tried to forget about him until one night I got a little bit drunk with a childhood friend, and she felt the need to admit something to me. You see, she used to come by my house for sleepovers quite frequently, but one night she had a terrible time and seemed to be quite sick for the rest of the slumber party. She never really gave a full explanation of what happened until this drunken confession. It was then that she told me that when I left the room for some reason, she wandered into the hallway and into the living room. She was walking forward with her head facing the other way, looking behind her towards my dog, and when she entered the living room and turned her head forward, she said that she was standing directly in front of a man without a face. She claims that she panicked, closed her eyes for a moment in fear, and when she opened them, he was gone. Now, as far as I can remember, I never told her about the faceless man out of embarrassment and fear that I actually was going insane. When I told her about what I saw all those years as a child, her face grew quite pale. I hear shadow people are very common apparitions, and many online sources give a variety of more logical explanations for them, but I wanted to share this regardless because I would really like to know if anyone else has had any similar experiences. For context, I've always been sensitive to the paranormal. For a long time, I thought that it was my parents' house that was haunted, then my dorm room, then my first apartment, and everyone since. It didn't take long, though, for me to figure out that it was something about me. The experiences come and go, sometimes not happening for years at a time, while other times multiple experiences happen in a week. Telling you the full story of my childhood experiences would have us here for hours, so I'll be skipping to adulthood for this story. So, the past few years I have had rare but significant experiences. Hearing someone walking around the school when I knew nobody else could be there. There's a sign-in sheet for after hours and I was the only name on it. I disarmed the alarm and reset it when I left and no one else in or out. I've been hearing furniture moving around the classroom a door down from mine, and I could recall my colleague mentioning that she needed to do a desk change, but I hadn't even heard her come in. I thought that it was odd that she hadn't said hello, as I was drawing a new chalkboard picture for Halloween on my classroom door. I wanted to go and check, but I told myself that I was just being silly, and it was just my colleague. That is, until she walked into the school 20 minutes later. I've also been waking up to my bed shaking violently, almost as though people were on either side of the bed pulling the mattress back and forth. At first, I honestly thought that there may have been an explosion or something in a gas station down the street, or maybe an earthquake or something. In the morning, there was nothing on the news though. My landlord hadn't felt anything, and nor had my co-workers. Nothing in my room had fallen, so I really had no evidence of my frightening experience. However, things have particularly ramped up in the past few months. You see, my mother passed away in April of 2023. A few months prior, a friend had given me the number to a psychic, and upon learning of my mum's cancer, I felt like there was nothing to lose in giving it a try. She donated her fees to charity, so I thought that at least something good would come of it. The things that she told me and the things that she knew about, I really couldn't explain. Things that never could have been found out on social media, for instance. While the main reason I contacted her was to ask her about my mum, and later communicate with her hopefully, I also decided to ask about the attachment that I had. She confirmed to me the attachment and that it was, in fact, in her words, not human. It was a demon. She was also able to confirm that yes, I was sensitive, that I was capable of doing the same things as she could, if I began to learn about it and practice it. Apparently I was and am a psychic. Once my sister called to inform me of our mother's passing at 3 a.m., I became overwhelmed with a desire to see her, just to know if she was okay. It took me almost 2 weeks, but I think that she came to me. I could see her move from the foot of my bed to the head. She wasn't clear to the eye, but her voice, that was clear. She said my name, and that's all that she said. But it was her voice right next to my ear. Even after wanting and waiting for this, I was still in disbelief, to be honest. A moment passed, and I called out to her quietly, but I didn't get anything back. But since then, I have continued to work on remaining open to her. Unfortunately, I do not know how to remain open to only her, though. And this is where my problem begins. The demon, or whatever it is, decided apparently to take advantage of my openness. I've had a few small noises, lights flickering, and the ever-infuriating feeling of it clinging to my back. The last of which hasn't happened since my early 20s, like 10 years ago. Today, though, today was a totally new experience. You see, I had shared small experiences with my brother as a kid, but not with my sister, who was much older than me. She has never experienced anything before in her life, until today. I cannot express how glad I am that we have shared this experience, to be honest, because I'm not sure that I would have believed it wasn't all in my head if it wasn't for this, though my sister is certainly less glad. Anyway, this is what happened. So, I was driving from Edmonton to Fort McMurray, 4.5 hours. Often I call someone to help me stay alert while driving. Just talking is enough. So I called my sister and we started chatting. Her cell phone wasn't working that well, so we switched to her landline, and as we talked, the reception would sort of go spotty and the call would end. Rural Alberta doesn't really have the best coverage, but no big deal. I would just call her back and we would go back and forth like this. The problem didn't arise from poor coverage, though. It sounded as though my sister dropped the phone in a sink filled with water. Then came what I thought sounded like she was turning on the carburetor in the other side of the sink, on and off, all the while the phone still being underwater. And next, the animal noises, or at least that's the closest thing that I can compare it to, an angry animal. The raspy, labored breathing. The sounds went back and forth, but the second time the breathing started, my sister ended the call. I had tried talking to her, but I couldn't hear anything but the strange sounds. Turns out, she was hearing the same thing. She heard those sounds and she tried to get my attention, but to no avail. She said that she couldn't take it anymore after the breathing and she had to hang up. This was new territory for even me, but for my sister, she was terrified. We continued our call until I was almost home and she had to pick her sons up from daycare. She is currently praying to not have any nightmares while I'm sharing this, but my dog is oddly unsettled all of a sudden and staring down the dark hallway as I'm sharing this. And boy do I hope that I don't start hearing those same noises. This is something that I've, never really told anyone about, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, so I thought that I would. A few years back, 2015 to 2016, when I was 18 to 19 years old, I used to work at this little cafe inside of a car parts factory. It was basically a full-out but compact restaurant kitchen and lunchroom for the workers to eat there. And well, this one day I get a call from my best friend or co-worker. She's all kinds of upset because of this creepy new temp worker that made her feel severely uncomfortable by asking her a bunch of personal questions, like what she drove, where she lived, if she was single, had any kids, when she got off work, etc. She didn't want to walk out to her car alone. Mind you, she was my age too, 18 to 19, and this dude was mid to late 30s at least, if not already in his early 40s. And we're in Flint, Michigan, so we weren't about to take any chances. So I drive up to the parking lot, find her car, park next to it, and she has a security guard escort her out. We didn't see the guy then, but she described him to me and the guard, and that was that for pretty much a few days. Someone apparently found him and told him to stay away from her, and so he did. But then he met me. I knew exactly who he was as soon as he stepped up to the register to place his lunch order, just from the description that I had been given and by the creepy vibes that he was giving off. He pulled the same intense Q&A on me that he had done to my friend too, but instead of telling him to get lost or calling security or anything like that, I just told him a bunch of straight up lies. I told him that I drove a blue 2012 Honda Civic, which I knew for a fact that was one of the second shift manager's vehicles who always parked near the front of the building, and so I knew that it was going to be there until at least second shift ended at 11 p.m. I also told him that my shift ended at around 9:30, which was really the time that I'd usually slipped out for a cigarette break. So when 9:30 hit later that night, I walked outside to smoke my cigarette, and I saw exactly what I was expecting to see. That stupid creep in the parking lot, close to the area that the Honda Civic was sitting. He was pacing back and forth behind two vehicles that were parked a few spaces down in the same row, playing on his phone the entire time. At one point, he glanced up and saw me staring at him, but I had my big leather winter coat on and a hat on as well, so I don't know if he recognized me at first from a distance or not. In any case, I finished my smoke and I went back inside and explained the entire situation to the security guards. one of which was the original guard that had escorted my friend out to her car a couple of days before, and they were dying laughing at the fact that I had pulled one over on this guy and had actually caught him being shady like that. I'm not sure exactly what they did about it because I went back to work after that, but I do know that they immediately went out and confronted him in the parking lot, and that the guy was fired that same week. To this day, I still don't know what his intentions truly were, but it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it couldn't have been anything good. So ultimately, I guess the moral of the story is always have your friends' backs and trust your instincts, because if you don't, you could end up cornered in a parking lot and possibly attacked or abducted by some creepy guy who asked one too many questions. I'll preface this story by saying that I work graveyard shift at a hospital laboratory, so I'm no stranger to weird, unexplained things happening. However, this experience, well, it happened in my own bedroom a few nights ago. So, generally sticking to my same night shift schedule, I typically find myself going to bed rather late, even on my days off. Monday night, I went to bed at around 3-ish. My girlfriend and cat had already been sleeping in bed. Sometime after I had fallen asleep, I remember my cat jumping up very fast like he had been startled. He did this 1 or 2 times, and I just rolled over and went back to sleep because cats are weird, right? Well, after he had done it a 3rd time, I sat up in bed myself half asleep to check on him and comfort him, and he just wouldn't come to me, which was odd for him. I can remember seeing his distinct shadow on the edge of the bed looking at me, but I had to reach to pet him and he wouldn't move. After this, I laid back down on my side, facing away from the corner of the bed that he was sitting on, and I started to go back to sleep, when I heard the deepest guttural mumbling, or growling is the best way that I can explain it, that I had ever heard. I can't remember if it was words or maybe just mumbling, but it sounded like those voice changes that people use on documentaries when they're interviewing anonymous people, and it was super deep. Now, I am not easily freaked out over paranormal stuff. In fact, I kind of enjoy it. But this was something else, and it sent the most insane chills down my spine that I essentially just laid there frozen. I didn't even turn around to look. I just went to bed and acted like I didn't hear it. Now, I don't know if this was some auditory hallucination since I was sort of half asleep or what, but it was an interesting experience to say the least. My girlfriend doesn't remember anything from that night. She slept through it all. But it was so clear sounding and very forward sounding, like it was coming right from the opposite corner of the bed over my shoulder. Like if I had looked, someone would have been standing at the edge of the bed. Also, the fact that my cat reacted the way that he did, I don't know. I don't think it was in my head. I think that there was something in my room. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 19. I'm female, by the way, and had just moved out of student accommodation into an actual flat with my friend group of 6. Now, the night that we moved in, it was just me and one of the girls that I'm close friends with. Her name's Lucy. I had my boyfriend over at the time. His name's Alec. The other people who were moving in 2 weeks later, as they were all in various holidays and visiting home and whatnot. So, it was just the 3 of us. Lucy was in her room and Alec and I were smoking in bed watching kung fu movies. And it was around this time that we noticed a man, maybe around 300 pounds and 6 feet, pacing outside of our window and looking in occasionally. We're on a basement floor at this time, but the windows were on ground level. But that was really weird. We just try to make sure that the windows are locked. And 20 minutes or so pass, everything seems okay, until Lucy runs into my room and says, "There's a man in the house." It was then that we realized, too, that we had left the door unlocked by accident. And that left chills down my spine. I'm like, what do you mean there's a man in the house? Alec is frozen solid. Me and Lucy go into the hall and there's this huge man who we saw looking in the windows in our hall. We ask, what are you doing in here? And he pulls out his phone and shows us a text message from an unsaved number with our address written on it and something about people being inside. I didn't understand it, but he tells us that he's looking for his girlfriend and that she lives here. And we're like, no, she doesn't. Please remove yourself from our house. He says okay and that he'll phone his girlfriend. He turns his phone low volume and he's speaking to another man on the phone who is clearly not his girlfriend. But with more urgency this time, we tell him to get out of the house and he says okay. He leaves. We lock the door and everyone is definitely shaken. He's still on the phone, mind you, to this man outside and they're speaking a language that we don't understand, but we can hear him getting angry. I tell Alec to please make the guy go away and he goes outside and tells him to shift away from our doorway as he's really scaring us. He says okay and apparently there's a taxi here for him, but he walks up a dead-end street where I can assure you that no taxis can go, and we just sit there dumbfounded. We tell our upstairs neighbors who we had met earlier that day about the whole ordeal. Their names are Charlotte, Matt, and Rob. They inform us that the same man had tried to come into their house apparently, insisting his girlfriend lived there as well. Charlotte already had a boyfriend who we knew of and had also met that day. Rob was definitely braver than all of us and threatened the guy with a knife the time that he came to their house, and he never bothered them again. And over the next couple of weeks, the man would occasionally come back and look into our bedroom windows. Alec was there most of the times, and to be honest, I'm really glad for that. I have no doubt that he tried the door again as well, but it was always locked after that. Eventually he seemed to drop off and lose interest, but I don't know. The whole thing was weird and I'm just glad that it ended. In many rural areas of the American West, cutting firewood in national forests is a necessary chore if you want to warm a house through the winter. Our home in mountainous central Idaho was no exception. It was normal for my dad to pick me up and my brothers up after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. My dad would fell the dead trees, then saw them into chunks. My brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it. We would continue this assembly line process until we had a truckload of wood, usually before nightfall. Hot, sweaty, and exhausted, we would pile into the truck cab and make our way down the mountain. At home the next day, we would unload and split the wood and stack it into neat little rows. The process was repeated until we had a winter's worth of fuel for our house, our grandma's cabin, and any extra for elderly neighbors. Now, this particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. This was well outside of our familiar logging area. No real reason for the change, but my dad said that he wanted a change of scenery. This logging road had not been maintained in some time. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk out in front, pushing rocks and wood out of the way as my dad lurched to the truck up the switchbacks. Yard by yard, we slowly made our way up the mountain. That hike was physically brutal, I remember that much. And as we ascended the mountain and got farther into the trees, this odd feeling started to set in. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the hike or something else, but there was a sort of electricity in the air, like the whole mountain was buzzing at a wavelength just below my senses. In some odd way, it felt like the mountain knew that we were there and it wasn't welcomed to that fact. I wanted to say something to my brothers, but before I opened my mouth, my younger brother said, "Does anyone else feel like we're all not welcome here?" My older brother and I stopped in our tracks and looked back at him. Both of us nodded in agreement. This moment was broken by my dad honking and motioning us to continue clearing the path. So reluctantly, we pushed forward to a small clearing in the woods where we finally stopped the truck. my dad, oblivious to our apprehension, or simply choosing to ignore it, grabbed his saw and went to work. As the wood was felled and loaded, I couldn't shake this ominous feeling enveloping me like a dark shroud. I noticed my brothers were taking occasional glances over their shoulders as we worked too. Everyone but my dad, it seemed, was on edge. The sun nestled down into the trees and twilight began to set in. As the light drained from the sky, my anxiety only intensified. It wasn't until my dad unexpectedly told us to load up that a wave of relief finally flooded over me. I could see the tension in my brothers melt away as well. The truck wasn't fully loaded, mind you, which was an oddity, but getting a half load was a waste according to my dad. We would sometimes work into the dark just to make sure the truck was full, but tonight he seemed eager to head home for some reason. With everything loaded, we started down the road, and although dead tired, everyone seemed to be in a much lighter mood now. We were chatting and cracking jokes while trying to blow off some steam from the afternoon. We were almost out of the tree line and into the valley desert. Going down the switchbacks, you want to be careful, especially with a load on the back, even if it was half that, when a brown blur jumped up from down the slope side of the switchback. My father swore, and that was the only word that came out of my dad's mouth as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and traveling downhill, there was no way to avoid smashing into the blur. The truck finally ground to a standstill. The four of us peered through the windshield, nobody saying a word. Illuminated in the yellow glow of our headlights was a crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling and cursing the deer's existence, my dad exited the truck to investigate. Doing as they were told, my brother stayed put in the truck. I didn't listen, following close behind my dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been traveling fast when we smacked the deer, just some hair and blood on the grill guard. Hitting a deer really wasn't that unusual, to be honest. The mountains were full of them after all. But what was unusual was that the deer dropped so quickly. At faster speeds, deer could still be upright and sprint away to die in the woods after a collision. That sort of last burst of an adrenaline dump. This one, though, just fell over like a rag doll. Before even approaching the carcass, though, a deep, foul smell hit us. Deer smell bad when they're alive, but this was on a whole nother level. It was the smell of decay and rot. My stomach began to turn as we got closer. My nostrils were burning as well. And coming up on the deer, it was clearly dead, like really, really dead. The stench was so overwhelming that my eyes started watering, in fact. The body was a true horror scene. The deer's eyes were gone, replaced with sunken, hollow holes. As if to overcompensate for their absence, the tongue was swollen and black as coal. It could not be contained, and it was hanging out of the side of its mouth. The underbelly was split open as well. Entrails and offal spilled onto the dirt. In the dim headlights, it sort of looked as though the deer's fur was moving, wiggling almost. Holding my breath, I bent down for a closer look, and my heart stopped. The deer, inside and out, was covered in maggots. It was dead all right, but our truck obviously didn't kill it. Clearly, it had been dead for days, if not weeks. I backed away retching. That electric anxiety came screaming back all of a sudden too. My dad was always the quiet, stoic type, but right now, even in the dim headlights of the truck, I could see the abject horror in his face. His gaze was no longer on the deer, but focused down the mountain. Poorly masking the fear in his voice, he told me firmly to walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed without objection, of course, and as I grabbed the door handle, a loud shriek came out of the trees. Branches were shattering and breaking as something was heading down the slope towards us. I slammed my door closed as my dad reached the truck. Before his door was shut, he pressed on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, sending us over the deer carcass and racing down the hill. With mine and my brothers yelling, it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us, but our truck popped out of the tree line and into the desert sagebrush. But once out of the woods, everything began to quieten down. We were left with only the rumble of the engine and the wind through the half-open windows. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop, and we all just sat there in silence for a moment. No one moved to leave the truck, and everyone started talking at once. We all had questions, like what was the screaming? How does a dead deer jump uphill in front of a truck like that? There was no way the truck killed it. Dad, he just shook his head and motioned for us to quieten down. That deer was dead when we hit it. It didn't jump out in front of us, it was thrown at us. We stared at him. He explained that all day up on the mountain, he too had felt uneasy. Not wanting to worry us boys, he apparently kept it to himself. He described it like walking into a stranger's living room while they're upstairs asleep. That feeling never left him, and as twilight came, he actually happened to catch a shadow in the corner of his eye, not far into the woods, and saw figures moving from tree to tree. He couldn't focus on them long enough for a good look before they dodged behind trees, but at that, his stomach dropped. Working hard to keep his composure, he hurried us to the truck to leave. It was after hitting the deer and discovering that it was long dead that my dad pieced together what was happening. Something threw that deer to get us to stop. Before the shrieking began, he could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the road, which meant that the whole thing was a trap. Running back to the truck, it could have started an ambush or triggered a prey drive, so we walked back to the truck instead. The second that we were inside, he drove that truck down the hill with no intention of stopping for anyone or anything. That feeling of electricity also didn't disappear until we hit the county highway. My brothers and I never saw anything as we drove away, but those screams from the forest, they will never leave my mind. We didn't gather firewood the rest of the season after that. For the first time in his life, my dad actually just bought what we needed. And although we started to gather wood again the next season, we've never been back up that particular mountain, ever. The Forest Service has permanently closed and reclaimed that road, in fact. The only way back up into those woods is a long hike, one that I'm definitely not interested in ever taking again. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer carcass, whatever chased us out of the woods that day, it didn't want us there. It wanted us gone. Or maybe worse, maybe it wanted us dead. As a young child, or a young teen, I lived in a very strange situation in the woods. I'm not sure if this encounter may have been some kind of entity or perhaps something different, but I do hope that someone can give me more information at least about what happened to me and my friend. So I, female, was around 12 years old at the time, and one of my best friends, Alex, must have been about 10. Alex's father had purchased a large amount of forested land around maybe 100 kilometers away from the city that we lived in, Montreal, Canada. It was all forest when Alex's family acquired it. They cleared a little patch to build a house, and the rest was pure, unadulterated forest. Their land was cut in two by a dirt road that, if you followed it for several kilometers, led to a few houses, and their land was very different depending on which side of the dirt road that you looked. On the right side, where their house was, the forest was light and luminous, or at least it felt that way. It wasn't too dense, with little rolling hills and a lovely place to play. On the left side of the road, however, it was another story. First, there was a deep ditch, maybe 2 meters deep, which then became quite high in a steep hill. Weirdly enough as well, all along the long road, the ditch was full of car parts. A set of car wheels here, a door there, a steering wheel way over there, all old and overgrown with moss. And over the steep hill, the forest gave off a really bad vibe. It had lots of very tall, dark trees with almost black trunks, and the place seemed somehow devoid of light or life. Climbing the hill, which we seldom were willing to do because of the creeps that it gave us, there was some part of swamp there as well. When we were there was this sort of strange pressure as well. We sensed a kind of animal instinct that told us to leave the place, I guess, but the strange atmosphere was spontaneously obvious to me and Alex, and we playfully called that side of the road the Demon's Forest. Now, one weekend, probably in 2001 or 2002, my family and I came to visit Alex's family. Bored by the adults, my friend and I decided to go and play in the forest. Alex's father told us to watch out. There was an animal that had been rummaging in their trash bin and causing other nuisances, apparently. He said that it was a dog that looked somewhat like a Rottweiler that surely belonged to somebody living up the dirt road. He warned us, though, that we shouldn't interact with the dog if we saw it, as it didn't look healthy as far as he could tell, or there was something weird about it. He said that it somehow looked diseased or contagious or had patches of fur missing. I can't remember exactly, but it was something like that. In any case, we set out on our walk eventually. It was autumn and the leaves were pretty and golden, many having already fallen to the ground. It was a calm, slightly overcast, windless day. The air was really still and calm that day, and Alex and I decided to walk along the dirt road, with the pleasant section of the forest to our right and Demon's Forest to our left. We chatted while following the road as it was rising up a slope, and as usual, we were slightly creeped out going up the road because of the weird vibes of the forest to the left side, but we were challenging ourselves to be brave and trying not to really think about how unsettling it felt. Now, a good distance away from their home, when it was already well out of sight, I noticed the first strange thing of the day. Out of the steep hill on the left side of the road, there was a very large and dark pine tree hanging over the road. Somebody had attached a pink ribbon to one of the branches, which was already a bit strange, since this was territory of Alex's family and they had no daughters or other little girls likely hanging around, or other people who may be owners of pink ribbons who were likely to hang out in this deserted road anyway. The strange thing, though, was that the ribbon was flailing strongly in the wind. Its loose ends were flapping almost horizontally, but it was a completely windless day. There was no wind to speak of. The ribbon was within my reach, so I touched it as it was flailing. I even flicked my finger and held it in the air to check if I could feel any wind or current or anything, as my dad had taught me. But the air was perfectly still. I mentioned it to my friend. He seemed distracted and was younger than me, and sometimes didn't catch on to what I said, so I didn't press the matter. We continued our climb, and eventually we reached a place where the hill on the left side of the road had a sort of gentler slope, and began further away from the road. In fact, it looked as if the hill was kind of carved out in a way that would have made it easy for us to climb to get into Demon's Forest. It almost seemed as if the hill was carved into a sloping sort of half circle, like in a theatre, I guess, and the road that we stood on would have been the stage. It gave us a very clear, treeless view of the hillside, though, full of golden and red fallen leaves. The trees began at the top of the hill, maybe 9 meters away. We stopped to admire the view. Canadian autumn's a sight to behold, let me tell you. When Alex suddenly got really excited. He thought that he heard something in the Demon's Woods up the hill, and he really wanted to pay attention. He explained that there are wild cats in that forest, that they had spotted them with his dad apparently, and one of them had reportedly had kittens. Kittens being one of the most exciting things in the world for kids our age, getting us riled up a bit. But somehow, and for some reason, my hackles were up and I couldn't really relax, even thinking about the adorable wild kittens. He actually thought that he had heard the cat meow in the forest, up the hill close by. I heard nothing of the sort and thought that he was inventing it. But he suggested that we try meowing at it to see if it would respond. Maybe it would even bring its kittens along and we could see them and play with them, he said. I hadn't heard any sounds at all and didn't really like this idea of screaming meows into the creepy forest. I mean, what kind of wild cat would respond to human children anyway? Wouldn't it be obvious that we were not cats by the sound of us? It seemed like a dumb idea to me, but hey, I was a little bit older. But before I could try to talk him out of it, he loudly meowed into the forest. And to my utter shock, the forest meowed back. Alex was delighted, so he meowed again. Something in the forest answered again. I was actually shocked. This just didn't make any sense to me, and it creeped me out. But I suspended my disbelief to see what would happen. He kept meowing over and over, and for every one of his meows, there was one coming back in response from the woods. Something immediately felt off to me. Feral or wild animals didn't behave that way, and even at 12 years old I realized that. And it wasn't an echo either. The cat did not bounce back any sound that we threw at it, except meows, which reciprocated immediately, and anyway, there were no hard rocky surfaces around of which sound could bounce off like that. Everything was covered in a soft layer of sound-dulling leaves, if anything. Alex, though, seemed to get even more excited. "Listen, the cat is coming towards us. She's coming to see us with her kittens." To my surprise, he was right too. There was a rustle of dead leaves coming from above us, from above the slope in the creepy forest. It seemed like the rustling was getting closer to us as well. But it was way off because cats are small and light and careful with their steps, right? They don't make a ruckus when they walk through the woods. But here, the rustling leaves sounded extremely obvious, along with the meowing. In fact, it sounded more like, I don't know, steps. Like someone with two legs walking in the leaves. And it was getting closer to us. My alarm signals were starting to go off at this point with the wrongness of it all, while my younger friend was completely oblivious. He was calling it more vehemently, noticing that it was coming towards us. Then I realized what seemed so wrong. The sound was coming toward us, but there was nothing to be seen there. What I mean is that right in front of us, we had the gently sloping hill, treeless and clearly visible. Anything coming from the forest, we should have been able to plainly see it, but there was nothing. No source for the rustling sound, nothing moving, but we could clearly hear the meowing. My friend then said, "Oh, her kittens are joining her. Listen, there are more sounds. They're coming to play with us." And he was right. The walking sounds seemed to have multiplied now, and they were coming from various directions all at once. They were getting closer, but as I spun around to look around us, there was nothing visible. Something was way off, and I wanted to leave at this point, but Alex was getting mad at me. The kittens were almost here, and he wanted to see them, so he insisted. At this point, it was extremely tense, and my fight or flight was activating from the wrongness of it all. We were alone and quite exposed on this theater stage to whatever was getting closer to us, which was, more and more obviously with every moment, decidedly not kittens. I was on the verge to force him to go and run home, and then suddenly I heard a very loud panting sound right at my feet. During the first millisecond, I got only mildly surprised because we had a huge husky at home. I was used to it panting next to my feet, I guess, but then a sense of profound dread just dawned on me as I realized that obviously my dog was not there, and it must have been another dog, a very big one by the sound of it, right at my feet. I panicked, looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got extremely close to me, almost on me in fact, without my noticing. Only there was absolutely nothing at my feet, but I could still hear the loud, breathy panting sound coming from there. I whirl around, all 360 degrees, screaming. Where is it coming from? There's nothing at my feet or anywhere around me. There's nothing here. yet the sound clearly was there. As I whirl about in a frenzy, I look up the dirt road that we were following, and maybe around 100 meters away, at the top of the slope, I see a lone dog just standing there. And it looks somewhat like a Rottweiler, but very, very bad in shape, extremely unkempt, with patches of fur missing, shaggy and dirty as heck, with some skin exposed where the fur is missing. It looks down at us too, and obviously there's no way that I could hear it panting at that distance, but it almost seemed as though the source of the sound that it was making was at my feet somehow. At that point, the flight instinct wins inside of me, and I have never run as desperately and as fast in my whole life. And thank goodness it was downhill. Alex kept pace right beside me, terrified as well now. We did make it home in one piece, but we never did walk in those woods ever again after that. I came to Alex's place several times in my life. I never wanted to walk in the woods again. We had amazing parties at his house as teens. I was often there rather drunk and having a great time, but I always had this very stressful sensation when I went out of his house, especially at night. When I slept over there, I also had this extremely strange experiences where, when I woke up, I sort of sensed as if something was there and was observing me. In my mid-awake state, I even saw something floating near the ceiling one day. I never had the sensation that it was an immediate threat, though whatever it was, it seemed to be observing. I'm not sure that whatever this was related to what happened on the dirt road, but I thought it was worth mentioning. We never did discuss what happened that day after that, but as I researched it for myself, I found out that the land was historically owned, perhaps by a Mohawk. If anybody can help clarify what happened, then I would be thankful, because it is the weirdest thing to date that has ever happened to me. So I used to live in a 3-story house with my parents, younger sibling, and our dog. We moved into this house a few months before my younger sibling was born, and that was when we first met the neighbors across the street. Lucas, who was the oldest child in their family, was always a bit strange. And there were some aspects of his personality that were more than just strange. They were straight up disturbing. It would take hours to cover everything, so I'm just going to get straight to the point. I'm almost positive that Lucas has been inside of our house in the middle of the night. Our house was built on a hill, so it looked like it was only 2 stories from the front, and the basement was connected to the backyard. The yards in this neighborhood were much larger than they are in the newer housing developments, so it would have been very easy for someone to enter our backyard unnoticed. Despite this, my family was terrible about making sure all of the basement doors were always locked. My younger sibling and I would always go in and out when we were playing in the backyard, or someone would go down to let the dog out, and we would end up forgetting to lock one of the doors before bed. We also lived in an area where it was common for people to leave their doors unlocked. However, my family did always lock the door leading down to the basement every night, along with all of the other doors on the main level of the house. I had a really messed up sleep schedule back then too, so I would usually be still awake at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And there are 2 specific instances that happened very late at night, which make me think that Lucas has been inside of our house without our knowledge. So one night, I was in my bedroom on the upper level of the house. It was probably around 2:30 in the morning when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. It was probably 2:30 in the morning when I suddenly heard the sound of an angry growl coming from downstairs. Thinking that my dog had spotted a cat in the front yard, I quickly rushed downstairs to stop him from barking and waking up my entire family. This kind of thing would happen every now and then, so I wasn't thinking too much of it at the time. But instead of going downstairs and finding my dog by the front window, I found him by the locked door that leads down to the basement. The fur on the back of his neck was standing up, and his nose was pressed to the bottom of the door. I instantly froze when I realized what was happening. There was something or someone on the other side of the basement door. I was barely a teenager at the time, so I began to panic and started making my way upstairs as quietly as possible. I woke up both of my parents, but neither of them took me very seriously. My dad just assumed that my dog was hearing random noises coming from outside, but he did eventually go down to check things out. He said that everything downstairs looked normal, but he also mentioned that he forgot to lock one of the basement doors that night. Then, there was another time that I was up late and in my room, but this time, instead of hearing my dog growling, I heard a loud bark that echoed through the entire house. The sound was sudden and intense, similar to a gunshot, I suppose, and it almost made me jump out of my chair at first. Assuming again that my dog had seen a cat outside, I quickly looked out of my bedroom window and tried to spot whatever he was barking at, but my heart suddenly dropped when, instead of seeing a cat, I saw Lucas running out of our front yard in the pitch black. I watched him run across the street and back towards his own house before I rushed to close the curtains and duck out of sight. I remember sitting there struggling to process what I had just seen and questioning why Lucas would be in our yard in the middle of the night like that. I told my mum about it the very next morning, and she said that she would bring it up to Lucas's mum. But because of these two instances and because of other details that I cannot really include, I'm almost 99% sure that Lucas has been inside of our house in the middle of the night. If you knew the entire story behind this family, then you would also find the thought of this to be extremely disturbing. I do want to mention, though, that this all happened years ago. My family no longer lives in that house, and those neighbors across the street are doing fine, but looking back on everything now, I'm realizing just how creepy the situation truly was. I work as an inspection clerk for a real estate agency in a medium-sized town, a mining town actually. So, needless to say, I see a lot of houses. It's worth noting too that a lot of houses are really creepy. With big inspections, I could be in a house till it's getting dark out. In my job, I take pictures of a range of categories in an area. For example, like the walls, the ceiling, windows, floor, cupboards. You get the picture. Noises like ticks and tacks are common occurrences. I attribute them to the house settling or the roof getting hot and cold, etc. But one day, one of the agents comes to me and asks me to do an inspection on a house that she was apparently too freaked out to do herself. And this house had my hair on edge the moment that I got in the front door. I would describe my feeling as an urge to get out or that I'm in danger. From the start, my senses are all over the place. They normally are. I mean, I'm always aware that someone could come in behind me. I always lock the gates and main doors behind me because of this. So, putting my feelings aside, trying not to listen to them, I start my work. I'm doing the entrance, the dining room, and I get to the living room. There's a door to the front yard in the living room, and I note that the windows, door, and curtain fixtures are of a pretty old style, I guess. So I begin noting down that the house must be pretty old. And that was when I start to hear someone's feet shuffling coming from the hallway behind me. It almost sounded like morning and slippers going to make coffee with a yawn type of shuffle. I pause for a bit and listen, but it doesn't happen again, so I just go back to work. Down the hallway, there's another mirror at the end with 2 rooms on my right and 2 bathrooms on my left. I go into the first room on the right. I notice a strong odor and think that it must be the carpet. Turns out that it was rotten. There's also a lot of stains on the carpet, and as I'm sort of jotting this down, I hear a voice. At first I thought it was the agent checking up on me, so I walk to the front door and I see nothing. So I go back to work feeling a little bit more on edge now. I go back to working, marking down the stains on the carpet, and this time I hear a distinctive no. I stop dead in my tracks and start looking around the room, really freaked out at this point. I couldn't see anything or anyone, so I finish the room and I head to the main bedroom, keeping an eye out, now convinced that there must be somebody in the house with me. I finish up the room without much happening. I'm walking out of the room into the hallway, typing notes on my phone, when out of the corner of my eye, I see someone that looks like a person in the mirror, directly on my right, standing at the end of the hall. I turn to the mirror, and when I do, it's nothing. I look down the hall, and there's nobody there. I let out a quiet and big gasp as this happened and sort of chuckled at myself eventually. Heading into the room in front of me that leads to an entertainment area, I then hear the shuffling again from the hall. I'm standing there listening when the first bedroom's door slams shut. Panicking, I'm going through the whole house trying to find someone messing with me, but there's nobody there. But it's then that I hear a female voice loudly saying, "Move." This time, I definitely heard it too. I really heard it. I start to head to the front door because my nerves are absolutely shot. As I get to the front door, the first room's door that I've opened again slams shut, so now I'm just noping it out of the house. I stand outside collecting myself, ready to go back in. I say a prayer for myself and I go back into the entertainment area. Nothing much happens after that, just some shuffling in the hall as before, but eventually I'm just too far to hear it. I finish the inspection and start heading out. Unlocking the front door, I hear "now" in the same voice. By this point, I am absolutely done with this, and I just say back, yeah, I'm leaving, and I hightail it out of there as fast as I could. Later, I learned the man staying there had lost his job and wife in the same month. His mother was sickly and in bed most of the time in the first month, hence the smell and the stains. I'm unsure if she passed away in that house, but all I know is that he went missing for 4 months, not paying rent, and was apparently evicted. The maintenance guy comes to me after work is done and said, "Dude, that house is freaky," telling me that his guys were telling him stories about stuff happening, like light switches turning off by themselves, moans and noises, you name it. The house is now being rented by the mines for their workers, but I haven't heard anything from them yet. But I doubt that it'll last long. So this all starts when me and my 2 buddies, me 19 and them 20 and 17, went to go fish off this bank on the river in the afternoon. The layout is that you drive over the levee before you drop down into a boat ramp or parking area right next to the river. We brought pizza, beer, weed, music, and of course our rods, hoping that we'd just hang out and do some late night fishing. At this point, we're all set up on the bank with our chairs and speaker, having a nice evening, and it's probably been 2 hours, about 9 PM now. All 3 of us were feeling good with some beers in our system, and then we all of a sudden hear 2 cars with super loud music pull up and everybody gets out. The cars must have had 4 or 5 people in each one because I heard a lot of people talking, but it was all in Spanish, so I couldn't really make anything out. We try to ignore it, but then it gets so loud that we just couldn't enjoy ourselves, so we start packing up our stuff to head back to the car and just chill out while we sober up. While we're gathering our things, we start to hear what sounds like an argument go down. We start to hear lots of glass shattering and people screaming at the top of their lungs. They couldn't see us, but they were basically no more than 20 feet behind our heads. At this point, we're just keeping quiet, and then you start to hear what sounded like somebody getting punched repeatedly, and then a loud splash into the river by the boat ramp, and someone saying, "Nah, leave him," which was the only word spoken in English. We didn't know what we had just heard happen, and we didn't want to stick around to find out. The 3 of us tracked back up the steep incline to get back to the car, but as soon as we came into their view, They all got back into the two cars and quickly sped back over the levee. Except, we spotted one of the cars just sitting on the top of the levee, slowly creeping forward. When we turned our car on, that car then went fully over the levee. We realized that we were the only car left in the parking lot, and it was now pitch black outside. Again, it's around 9:30. We sat there for no more than 30 seconds, just trying to process what we had just heard go down. And then we decided that we needed to get out of there completely and park somewhere to sober up all the way. As we're going over the levee, the road goes over it and then down and makes a sort of sharp left there. Right after we take the sharp left, our hearts drop when we see 4 cars lined up completely horizontal across the road, blocking us from getting through. There's orchards on our left and right, so there's really no going around at all. At this point, my buddy just gassed it straight towards their bumpers to try and split in between the cars and get out of there, even if it meant damaging the front end of his car. Just as we do that, one of the 4 cars slightly moved out of the way, creating a gap. We flew right through it and we got the heck out of there, and they were laying on their horn while we passed through. We don't know what their intentions were, but clearly there were 2 cars in the boat ramp area where we were at, and 2 cars on the other side of the levee blocking the road from anybody else coming in. I ended up filing a police report just in case they really did dump a body into the river. It happens all the time here, but I haven't heard anything back. Whatever was going on that night, it was definitely one of the most terrifying experiences that I've ever had. When we were young, my cousins and I had a bush house at the end of the back garden, just before the garden opened up into the heath. Due to me being a full-time wheelchair user from birth, it was Gran's idea that instead of having a tree house that had to be climbed, it would be safer and more practical to have a bush house that all of us kids could use. Even though we protested greatly, as although I'm disabled, I frequently used to climb trees in the local parks and over the heath, with the help of my cousins obviously. But Gran's word was final, and we never argued with her, as she was a beautiful and lovely matriarch, but also as tough as an old boot and very scary when pushed. So with all of that said, we busied ourselves on choosing an appropriate bush for our new play area. On selecting a perfect one, Gran delegated tasks to the older boys to clear the outer area of the bush and also make a little hollow inside of it, with pieces of spare wood on the ground to serve as a basic floor so that my little wheelchair could run safely and easily inside of it. Gran was reasonably young at that time, and while the boys were doing the heavy work, she arranged us younger ones in getting furniture, supplies, and accessories to make our new play space cozy and comfortable for all of us. A year later, our old bush house was in full use. In the daytime, us younger ones played in it after school. On weekends and holidays, and in the evenings and nights, it was a place where the older cousins could have some privacy away from, well, the eyes of Gran and Mum, and to do whatever they did. Our bush house was cozy though. We got chairs, beanbags, and floor cushions donated by relatives and friends of the family. We also had a small table that we had a tablecloth for, and our Auntie Jay made some pretty curtains that we hung up the best that we could. We even had a cupboard where we kept snacks in, and only when the older boys or Mum were there, we were allowed to use the camping stove to heat tinned beans and sausages or pot noodles up and make some tea. Gran's bingo friend, Jean, donated a hand-me-down rug. It was shabby and out of date, but we thought that it was cool. Now, it was slap bang in the middle of the summer holidays, probably early July when this happened. Elle and I were 7 and G was 11. Our older cousin G's brother, A, was there earlier, but by 3 o'clock had grown tired of hanging around with us and had gone out with his mates. The 3 of them were coming back later to make us all dinner on the stove. Elle and I were sitting at the table, playing Beggar Your Neighbor with a pack of playing cards that we got from the living room cupboard, and G was sitting in the corner of the bush house on a beanbag, reading The Secret Garden, I think, for the 3rd time. In other words, it was just another normal at-home day. Nothing unusual or odd occurred, till around 4 when we all heard a sound that was at odds with the peaceful scene. It was sort of between a growl and an owl's hoot and a man mumbling. We were particularly outdoorsy kids, being born and raised in the outskirts of urban London. But being bright little girls, we all knew that owls are nocturnal creatures, and the accompanying sounds that were mixed with the hoots didn't come from the same bird. The weird sounds were joined by a furtive and stealthy rustling coming from the back of the bush house. Actually, it was really near to where G was sitting, and she jumped up, stifling a scream by covering her mouth with her hands. We also saw a dark dog-like shape through the dense foliage of the back of the bush house, which incidentally led straight onto the beginning of the heath, as I said earlier. The strangest thing about this figure was that it was very present, but also rather ethereal, almost as if the figure was attempting to hide intentionally. Also, throughout this period, there were no other natural sounds, no bird sounds, no insect sounds, and no background human noise. Being right in the center of a council estate, you could always hear people talking, cars revving and dogs barking, all the regular noises of urban community living. But at that time, it was as if the entire world had paused, and us three were the only ones conscious and present, along with this mysterious figure. We really didn't know what to do, but we gathered together, and both G and L took one handle of my wheelchair and pulled me back out of our bush house, not taking our eyes off of the translucent figure as we went. When we were free from the bush house and close enough to home for us to feel out of danger and safe, we just looked at each other very doubtfully, but I could tell that we were all terrified. G suddenly said, "Stay here, don't move or speak, okay?" She ran to the garden shed and climbed up the side to the manky, rotten roof. I completely lost it at this point, letting out a squeal of utter fear. Quick-witted as usual, though, Elle put her hand over my mouth and hushed me. Elle and I watched while G looked over the hedgerow which divided our back garden from the beginning of the heath. From our position, her face was clearly visible, and G's expression was a mixture of confusion, surprise, and fright, and her pretty brown eyes looked really troubled. We waited for G to come back to us before asking her in earnest what she saw. She didn't answer straight away, but when she did, she said, "It was so strange. I didn't see anything. No dogs, no other animals." She paused, her young mind trying to summon the words to explain what she witnessed. "There was a man. I saw the back of him walking away towards the iron fence." My 7-year-old's mind found it hard to comprehend what G was saying, and one look at Elle told me that she was experiencing the same. We both said together, "What man, G? What did he look like?" G sighed, biting her lip, a habit that she still has to today, when she's anxious or worried or trying to explain something tricky or difficult. "Well, I didn't see him properly. His face and all that, I only saw his back. He did have really long, scruffy hair, though." Her eyes wandered over nervously to the end of the garden leading out to the very public heath. Elle and I both followed G's gaze. We all shuddered, and nobody spoke for ages. For a long time we sat in silence, G and Elle sitting on the back step, and me on my wheelchair alongside of them. And suddenly, I noticed something and exclaimed to the others, "Listen, everything's back to normal." We all listened, and the regular everyday noises had returned. The world appeared to have resumed business as usual. A while later, A and his two mates came back, and sensing some tension from us, they asked us what was up. We did tell them everything, and two of them ran back to have a look around. They were gone for about 45 minutes. When they returned, they said that they didn't see anything. No strange men, no animals, nothing unusual or dodgy at all. So we spent the rest of the day hanging out with the boys, eating dinner in the bush house, and later watching films and eating junk food. We never did tell Mum about the experience until a few years back, long after we were grown, and we still don't know or cannot explain what the heck happened that day. 22 years ago, I lived in a house on a lake. I rented a room from a lady that lived in the other room. I had been living with a good friend but moved out and needed a new place. My parents actually found the listing in the newspaper and set me up with it. So, aside from a strange living condition of living in a two-bedroom bungalow with a complete stranger in the middle of nowhere, it seemed like it was actually going to be pretty nice. My new housemate had a large dog that actually kind of freaked me out a bit. However, she ended up being a super sweet dog. My housemate was never home too. Between work, her friends, and her boyfriend, I saw her like all of 3 days out of 3 months that I lived at the house. So, in the end, I practically took care of the dog. The thing about this dog, though, is that she would hide under my housemate's bed until she was hungry or needed to go outside. And never having had dogs, I didn't really know any better. The first month wasn't anything to write home about. I got some awesome photos of the moon over the lake. Somewhere in this time frame, I started recognizing the facts above. I also started getting a weird vibe in the house, I guess. In fact, if I wasn't in my room, I wanted to be in there pretty much only. I also only felt safe during the day. I use that term because the feeling at night was the same as if you think something bad is about to happen. The problem is that you just couldn't quantify it. But at some point, I started hearing knocking noises randomly in the ceiling near the kitchen. I figured that it was just birds because there's a lot around. One afternoon, though, I decided to check out the attic crawl space located above the kitchen cabinets. It was a wooden door with a single lock or latch on it, and a fixed handle. I'd eaten lunch and climbed up there to check it out, opened the door, and didn't feel threatened or anything. I peeked my head in and looked left and right over the bedrooms. Basic attic, nothing special. I closed the door and climbed down. But from that moment on, something definitely changed. The dog came out of the kitchen and just sort of stared at me. Like, didn't even move, not an inch. It honestly made me very uneasy. I tried the tricks of outside, treat, play, but she just didn't move. So, in the end, I just sort of went to my room and shut the door. In the weeks that followed, the events became more and more unnerving as well. I began to stop being able to sleep. I turned to leaving music on overnight, very low volume, but it was on nevertheless. As time passed, I got to where I felt like someone was standing in the corner of my room. One evening, the alarm on clock radio in the living room, it also turned on by itself. At first, I didn't even know it was there, to be honest, because I never went in there. Nothing in there was mine. Next, over the last 2 months, it had never gone off. But I asked my housemate, when I saw her next, about that, and she denied setting it. She was also visibly confused as to why it would go off like that. But I began to feel as though I was being watched in every room. I felt as though the thing in my room was always there. I began to wake from sleep for no reason. I began grinding my teeth at night as well. I moved to sleeping with a black light on, the lowest light level that I could get in the room. Music became CDs that would repeat indefinitely, and now I would wake up, look around, and see nothing and then try to go back to sleep. My housemate and a friend were at the house one evening too, and the friend claimed to be a psychic, and she looked dead at me and asked me how I was sleeping. I hadn't seen the housemate in weeks and hadn't told her about my problems. She then tells me that there's apparently an old man in my room and that he doesn't like me. I asked if there was anything that I could do, and she said no. I began addressing this man, though, trying to fix things in a desperate attempt to get more sleep and asking him to leave me alone, but life got much worse. I would be on the phone with my now wife and would fall asleep, and she would tell me years later that there were really strange sounds that scared her. She said that she would stay on the phone to ensure that nothing happened to me. I began to have regular nightmares every time that I closed my eyes. My work started to suffer. I was exhausted. It was around this time too that I began to see a dark cloud like mist that appeared to pour out of the cinder wall, with the lights on, mind you, in the corner of the room the man had been reported standing in. I would walk over and touch the area, but there was never anything there. I would go back to bed and see it still happening. My wife was getting ready one morning, and while putting on makeup, she also said that she told me that the face just wasn't hers. She left the bathroom and she never went back in. That night, we were both asleep. She had become accustomed to my nightmares at this point. I had a dream that she and I were in my car driving down the road. It was nice. I look at her and then back at the road in time to see 3 children in the road. The next sequence happened so fast, I had no time to react. Each hit the windshield and sort of appeared zombie-like. I immediately awoke, obviously. I was sweating, shaking, and scared. My wife was instantly awake also. She asked what happened, and I relayed the story above. And her face lost color. She looked very concerned. Thinking it was the content of the dream, I apologized. But she sat silent, long enough to make me wonder if something was wrong with me. She eventually broke the silence and said that just before you woke me, I dreamed that we had just gotten into your car. We left, and the next day I found somewhere else to stay. We moved to another state, and the first night in the new place, I slept non-stop, perfectly. I woke up rested and recognized the silence in my head, if that makes sense. And after getting out, I'm more convinced than ever that there is something going on with that house at the lake. So I moved in with my boyfriend into his house back in November of 2021. It's an old trailer, and I knew from moving in here that there was something, but didn't feel like it was harmful in any way. And at first, it didn't even seem like it wanted to make itself present. I have a pretty good knack for feeling out things like this, as I've dealt with what I could say paranormal stuff, or at least things that just make absolutely no sense my entire life. Anyways, I've had the usual things, like things not being in places where I left them, knocking, cabinet doors, sort of being opened and shut that I know that I didn't open or shut, shadows, and just lots of stuff that could maybe be explained away, but there's a few things that I just cannot get over. The first being something that happened a few months back. My boyfriend and I were in our bedroom about to go to sleep. I had left the room to go into the kitchen to get some water. From our kitchen, you can see our hallway that our bedroom is at the end of. While I was in the kitchen, I saw my boyfriend peering around the corner of the doorframe of the bedroom looking at me. I figured that he was messing with me or something, but when I came back to the room, he was in the bed under the covers. And when I asked him why he was looking around the corner at me, he had no idea what I was talking about. Mind you, my boyfriend is not the sort of person to do this. Anyway, flash forward to yesterday. I had gone out in the morning to get some coffee and do some laundry. When I came back, all of the shoes from our shoe rack were on the floor, but they didn't look like they were knocked off. It looked more like they had all been sort of taken off and placed on the floor. I had first blamed it on our dogs, but one of our dogs is crate trained, and when I went into the living room where his crate is, his crate had been moved across the room and into the kitchen. He's never moved his crate before on his own, and I'm really not sure how that's even possible for him. Not to mention my dogs were losing their absolute minds when I returned. Now, I wouldn't have been so bothered by this if it wasn't for the fact that when we were going to bed last night and I walked into the bedroom, I saw my boyfriend peering at me from inside the closet. The only thing is, my boyfriend was right behind me coming into the room with me. I want to play it off as I'm just seeing things, but it just doesn't feel right to me at all. I plan on smudging the house this weekend, and as I've said, I've dealt with a lot of things in the past, but nothing like this. I guess that I'm just asking if anyone has dealt with anything similar, or could offer any advice in this situation. Ever since the age of 13, I've always seen, heard, and felt things that are unexplainable more times than I can count. I have a family history of mental illness that could be the reason as to why I had these experiences. So when stuff like this did happen, even though I was terrified, I would brush them off as just hallucinations. I am on medicine now that is really helping me, and when I do have hallucinations, they are far and few between. However, with all this said, this time in particular has me totally confused and thoroughly creeped out. So I was 17 at the time. My family and I had just gotten back from vacation really late, and we had all agreed that a shower before going to bed would be really nice. My family is really big. There are 12 of my family, and 8 of us were living in the house. I said that I would take the last shower because I wanted to sit outside and get some time alone anyway. The only light source was one of those street lamps to light our driveway. Our house was in the middle of absolutely nowhere. It had been about maybe 15 minutes, and as time passed on, an uneasy feeling started to creep into my stomach. I felt like it would probably be a good idea to go inside at this point, but when I heard coyotes yipping and howling somewhere out in the field, I decided to stay outside for a little longer and listen to them. That was when pure fear consumed everything in my body, though. Not even controlling my own body, I slowly looked over to the road, and that's when I saw what I can only describe as a 10-foot tall figure with elongated arms and legs and giant red eyes gliding down the road, about as fast as a slow-moving car. This thing was really, really thin, was standing completely straight up, and was hovering about 1 to 2 feet above the road. I watched in horror as the thing passed by our house without even a sound. The whole time, I couldn't move. A couple of minutes later, I finally regained control of my body and I ran inside. I didn't tell anyone about it other than my doctor because, to be honest, I just thought it was just another hallucination. Anyway, a year later, I moved in with my sister and brother-in-law, and while my brother-in-law and I were on a bike ride at about 11:30 at night, talking about creepy experiences that we've had. I started telling him about the Coyote Man, as that was the name that I'd given to him. As I was explaining the features of the thing, his face grew more and more confused as I continued to talk. Just as I was going to talk about the big red eyes that the thing had, his face lit up. I asked him why he was making the face that he was, and then he lifted his hands up to his eyes, making large circles with both of them. I started getting creeped out, and that's when he was like, "Big red eyes?" And I immediately started getting chills. You see, he started to explain that when he was 19, he saw the exact same thing, and right before he saw it, he heard coyotes yipping and howling as well. I was freaking out at this point because I never told anyone about it, other than my doctor, and I thought that I was just seeing things. He continued to tell me, though, that the thing actually chased him, and he said that he was absolutely terrified and that it was the fastest that he'd ever run in his whole life. He said that the only way to lose this thing in the end was to climb to the top of a silo. He said that he was up there for pretty much the rest of the night, just waiting for this thing to show up again, but it never did. I got chills for minutes on end when he told me that. I have no idea what that thing was, as I've never heard of anything like it since. Every time that I think about that experience, though, I get super creeped out. Like I said, for the longest time, I just thought it was just another hallucination, but hearing that story from my brother, it makes me think twice about it. If anyone has any info, input, or ideas, it would be much appreciated. When I was in my early days of my career and joined an internship in a small town, a few of us were housed by the company that we worked for in a modified apartment. They basically had joined 2 apartments together, so there were 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on each side, with a really, really long corridor in between. Now, towards the end of the assignment, we had a group presentation, so the bunch of us living on our side, we worked on the presentation together, decided to head very early into the office and practice. As per our plans made the previous evening, Me and this girl called Simna woke up first around 4:30, so we could use the 2 bathrooms each and get ready. I didn't mind using the bathroom at the other end of the corridor, so I collected my toiletries and headed that way. Simna was doing the same on our side, and we didn't really talk as it was way too early and others were also sleeping. The 2 bedrooms on the other side were empty, and one was closed. I assumed that they were sleeping. I set my stuff on the counter and realized quickly that I forgot my bath towel, so came out of the bathroom and saw Simna standing in the middle of the darkened corridor with her back to me. I sort of halted immediately because something seemed very off with the way that she was standing. The hair on my arms was raised up and warning bells went off in my head. I must have made some sound though, because this person turned their head around to look at me. It looked exactly like her, but she was smiling broadly at me, like really smirking. I quickly said, hey, what's going on? To her, but at the same time sort of backed up into the bathroom where there was light and hot water to use as a weapon, I suppose. I didn't dare come out and I started praying. After around 20 to 25 minutes of time had passed, I heard knocking on the bathroom door and my roommate's, not Simna, voice asking me if I was done. I didn't say anything to her. I couldn't understand it myself, but as I walked down the corridor to my room, I saw Simna getting ready in her room. I went to her and was like, "What the heck, dude? You scared me." And she did not know what I was talking about. I did not know this girl very well, but she was not a prankster from what I could tell. Also, it was too early in the morning and we were too geared up about the presentation for her to do something like that and to pretend like nothing happened. Till the end of that internship, she maintained that it wasn't her that scared me that morning. To this day, I cannot explain what or who I saw that morning. So my house was built in the 70s. Not particularly new, but not really that old, I guess, too. We moved here in the early 2000s. I don't really know any of the history behind it, but we've always joked that there are ghosts here. Doors slamming, creaking, and things randomly disappearing has always been blamed on ghosts, but around 5 years ago, it started becoming a tad more aggressive, you could say. Sounds of light footsteps in the hallway, scratches from the second floor and inside the wall. Mind you, we have no rodent problems, so it seemed sort of unexplainable to the entire family. Then, one day, around 3 to 4 years ago, I was home alone sitting in the living room when a loud bang appeared from the second floor. It was so loud I was worried that the upstairs cabinet had fallen over on the floor or something. When the bang hit, my lights flickered too and the TV turned off and on. I could feel the shake all the way down the stairs. I went up to check what happened, obviously, and when I did, everything seemed the same. This has happened several times now, and it's almost entirely identical. A loud bang, a shake, flickering lights, but nothing ever seems out of place. What makes this worse too is that you can't hear it when you're upstairs, you can only hear it when you're downstairs. I know that sounds weird, but that's what happens. I've been called on my phone to stop slamming the door so hard when I'm laying silently in my bed and stuff like that, and I haven't heard a thing. In the past year, I've also started seeing things. I might just have imagined things, but at one point I could have swore that I saw a toddler sleeping in my brother's bed. I saw her pretty clearly too. She was young, maybe 3 years. She had long blonde hair and her arm hung over the edge of the bed. When I approached her, she just disappeared. This was probably a year ago, but it still really confuses and spooks me. Then, a few weeks ago, I encountered her again. I was home alone when someone knocked on the door. I was a bit confused as I wasn't expecting anyone. As I approached the hallway, I heard the door closing and I heard a young girl saying, "Hello," like she had just come home and was announcing her being there. I felt chills run down my back, but I still opened the door to look. My brother is 5, and I figured that he might have just come home early or something, but no one was there. Today, I closed a door, like properly shut, and then it just opened a bit again. And when I looked at the open door, it shut again quickly, closed. And now I keep hearing banging sounds from downstairs, and I just don't know what to do. I'm like unironically kind of worried. Also, I don't know if this matters, but the dreams that I get in this house are always so vivid compared to when I'm not at home. Sometimes I wake up with the sheets off my bed and blanket as well because I sleep so uneasy, I guess. Anyways, I could really do with some advice. I don't think speaking to whatever this is works. I tried, and I guess maybe things stopped being so noisy for a bit, but then it would just start up again, and that's been a bit of a theme for this whole thing. So yeah, if you have any advice, then please do let me know. So I'll start off by saying that I've always been open-minded. So has my friend and her partner. We've all had our little strange or odd encounters over the years, and sometimes came up with a logical explanation or left it to the unknown, I guess. But we have never had something like this happen before. Well, the car part anyway. So, this happened a couple of hours ago. Me and my friend and her partner were downstairs about to watch a film. Their young son, 4 years old, was upstairs fast asleep. The stairs are in the front room where we were sat, and their 4-week-old daughter was in the Moses basket by the sofa. We had turned off the lights, shut the curtains, and got comfortable. There was a small bang upstairs, so my friend's partner went to check their son. All fine. But as the partner walked down the stairs, he heard almost like a wind chime jingle from their bedroom, and said out loud like, "Huh, that's weird," but put it down to a possible draft somewhere or something. Not even 5 minutes later, we get comfy, go to watch the film, and me and my friend notice car lights outside, rather bright, so we take a peek. It's their car, full beams on, for about 10 to 15 seconds, and then off again. And we all looked at each other dumbfounded. Then again, a bit longer this time. Then the indicators flashed a few times, then stopped. And as it stopped, their son screamed, like not even a second passed, and he started screaming and crying, to the point that he was so wound up that he was nearly sick. Of course, as soon as he screamed, the dad ran straight up, as my best friend was breastfeeding. The dad brought him down, and he was inconsolable. And being only 4, he couldn't exactly say much, just sort of some broken words. Then the TV went off with no warning, then a bang upstairs, and then silence. We spoke for a good hour or so trying to decipher what the heck just happened, but the car keys were in the other room, nowhere near any living animal or human. When we approached the car, me and my friend's partner, we checked if it was locked, and it was. We looked in the car manual and had a Google search, and nothing comes up regarding the full beams just staying on and then intermittent hazard lights going off. There was no alarm as well, which was really strange, and definitely nobody around. But since then, their son won't settle. Their little girl keeps waking randomly and crying, and they've heard a couple of more bangs. I've never experienced car lights being set on or off like that before. Usually an electrical fault would happen when the vehicle is on, or you would have a warning light, but nothing. It's a newish car as well, so quite full of tech, and to be honest, it's been checked out and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong. I have had a few experiences myself, but usually with lights in the home, candles, and noises, etc., but nothing to this level. Also, the first feeling that I had was sickness and dread. I've not had gut feelings like this regarding the paranormal for many years now, but I genuinely felt unwelcome, and I dare say almost watched too. In July of 2019, I was leaving a co-worker or a friend's house, a 4th of July party. It was about 10:45 p.m. It was me, a 36-year-old female, my husband, 54-year-old male, and now their 9-year-old daughter. It was in a town about 45 minutes drive from home, mostly down country roads that I didn't know, so I was using my GPS. Now, this area of town basically rolls up the street, so to speak, at 5, so the roads were mostly deserted with only a few cars passing every now and then, and absolutely no cars in front of or behind us. When all of a sudden this very dark vehicle, I think it was a hunter green or maybe a dark grey, pulls up behind us and starts to tailgate my car. I don't normally speed more than 5 to 6 miles per hour over the speed limit, so someone tailgating me is not really unusual, I suppose. The longest stretch of this 2-lane road before being able to hit the highway was a sort of winding tree-lined road. There was this big curve in the road, almost a hairpin turn that was not as sharp, so you could almost see a mile in the distance from where you entered that section of the road to where you came out of it, and there were no turn-offs, no shoulders to stop on, nothing, just road and trees. When I entered the huge curve, the car was still right on my tail, not flashing, not weaving, not using the horn or anything, just still following right on my tail. So, all of a sudden, I look in the rearview mirror and the headlights from the car that was tailgating me were gone. I didn't see any parking or marker lights. I didn't see any tail lights. I looked back as far as I could see and I couldn't see that car anywhere. I mentioned this to my husband and he started looking around behind us and didn't see them anymore. They were just gone. Again, there was just nowhere at all to stop and turn around or turn off or anything. I quickly turned my attention to the directions on my GPS and forgot about that car though. And about a half a mile after the huge curve in the road, there was a stop sign where I had to take a left onto the road that leads to the highway and closer to civilization. When I stopped at the stop sign, there were no cars coming or going in either direction. But just as I was about to hit the gas and make my left turn, there was a knock near my back driver's side window. I looked on my side mirror but didn't see anything. I heard another knocking sound closer to the same spot, but more on the metal of the car and not quite on the window now. My husband started turning to look back and I asked my daughter if she saw anything, but neither of them did. So I said, "Oh well, guess we're just hearing things." And I made the left-hand turn and kept on going. But as I made my left turn, I glanced back at the entrance to that road one more time, and there were a pair of headlights lighting up the road right where my car had just sat, and 2 people, I was too far away to make out details, were returning to the dark-coloured vehicle that I had seen before. Now, I can't say this for sure, but I'm almost positive that had I opened my window or door to find the source of the knocking, something horrible would have happened to my family and myself that night. I've recently moved to Weed, California. It's a small town next to Mount Shasta for work. I'm an avid hiker and love exploring, so naturally, 2 days ago, I decided to go hike the mountain on one of my days off. I'm not entirely sure why, but I decided to drive my car very deep into the forest surrounding the base of the mountain, as far as the dirt road would take me anyway. It was around 3 p.m. with a clear sky, so I was pretty confident and enjoying the scenery as I got out of my car and started my hike, heading closer to the mountain. At first, it was your regular everyday hike, lots of birds and squirrels around, that smell of nature that fills your lungs as you walk across the terrain. It really wasn't until I reached a small dried up river that I noticed that something was just off. As I stopped to look at the dried up river and take pictures, I noticed that it was strangely very, very quiet. No birds chirping, no signs of squirrels or any other animals, and even the sound of the wind that you would hear when you're on a mountain seemed to be completely gone. At the time, I thought it was just an odd coincidence and started walking up alongside the river. But as I kept walking and being able to only hear my own footsteps, I couldn't shake that feeling that I was being watched. Not the kind of feeling that makes you think someone is outside your window watching you. The kind of feeling that makes you feel multiple people or things are observing your every movement, studying you. I've never had that kind of feeling in my life, but what happened after made me completely forget about that feeling. I suddenly started to hear something out of nowhere that sounded like, the only way I can describe it is angelic humming or maybe a song with no lyrics. But it also sounded strangely electric, like the sound telephone lines make. It wasn't very loud, but enough to make me look into the direction that it was coming from. I looked to the other side of the dried up river that had multiple trees and other foliage to see someone or something looking straight at me. It almost looked like a ghost with it looking completely white, but this thing was very clearly there. It almost looked like it was wearing a robe, I want to say, but I couldn't see any feet, hands, or even a face. Although it had an oval head, that's for sure. However, I could feel it looking straight at me, almost as if it was trying to remember my every detail or something. And even from that far away, I could tell that its entire body had a very weird texture, almost like porcelain, but if porcelain was a silky fabric. It was very obviously not human, whatever it was. I was very understandably in complete shock and terror, frozen in place, kind of scared. We both looked at each other for what felt like forever, but was most likely around 20 or 30 seconds. I very slowly started walking backwards. I don't think I got more than 2 steps when it sort of tilted its head, as if it was curious or even surprised at what I was doing. All the while, I could still hear that electric angelic humming, and I could have sworn too that it got a little bit louder when I took those steps back. When I turned my head to look behind me to make sure the way was clear so that I could run, the song suddenly just stopped, abruptly without warning. This shocked me, and when I turned back to look at the thing, it was gone. No sign of it anywhere. Well, as soon as I saw that it disappeared, I ran as fast as I could, following the path that I took back. Even after it had disappeared and while I was running, I could still feel like I was being watched from all sides. I almost tripped a few times due to how fast I was going, but when I got back to my car, sounds of animals and the mountain wind suddenly came back, but I was still scared out of my mind and drove as fast as I could away from that mountain. I've never had anything paranormal happen to me in the past, and I've honestly always been very skeptical of stuff like this. But this experience has left me questioning a lot of things. I don't think that I want to go back to that mountain. I've even had a nightmare about the experience, and I'm not even sure what I saw or, to be honest, what to call it. So I, a 27-year-old female, went backpacking alone over the recent long weekend, which was 10 out of 10 beautiful. The second night, I camped at a beautiful high-elevation lake, which could also be accessed by a short sort of 1-mile trail, so there were a few other campers and several people who were just day hiking or fishing. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting around my camp reading when a guy, maybe mid-20s, walked by carrying a fishing pole and a small cooler. I didn't think much of it, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, he doubled back and came and said hi. I said hi and went back to reading, but then without warning, he then sat down on a stump next to me. I was completely taken aback at this invasion of my space. He started asking me questions that were really just statements, but in a sort of creepy amused tone, like, so you're just reading sort of thing. And then looked behind me and noticed my tent and said, "Oh, you're staying the night here alone, huh?" I didn't say anything in response to this in particular, but it was pretty obvious that I am. It's hard to explain, but his vibe was just really off. I was so uncomfortable that I couldn't even really form words or tell him that I was trying to be alone to get him to leave. I was honestly paralyzed. His eyes were so dead and dark and just drilling into me. I just responded with like ahas or yep or something to that effect, and just tried to pretend that I was still reading. Without warning too, he pulls out and cracks a beer, and lights a cigarette and just starts blowing it at me. At this point, I'm so uncomfortable that I just stop responding. Soon, another hiker wandered by and strikes up a conversation with this guy, and I took the opportunity to grab my water filter and bladder and pretend to need to get some water. I went to the shore and filtered some water, super slowly, and saw him walk away to go sit with this new guy, which made me super relieved. Except that he kept looking in my direction. I came back eventually and got inside my tent, and for 20 minutes everything was fine. I had the rainfly pulled back and was watching the sunset and loosely organizing my things when he sort of popped out from behind my tent and stood maybe 1 foot from my door, just looking down at me. He didn't say anything, but just started laughing really creepily, sort of fakely again. I asked, "What?" And his response was, "This is just really funny." I felt literally sick to my stomach and finally responded with something like, "I'm taking a nap now, so have a good night." He laughed again, but luckily left. Later I saw him still wandering around the camp with no real purpose, still looking in my direction often. I had no service, but I wrote down his last name, at least what was written on his cooler, and where he said that he was from while talking to other hikers in my notes app, just in case, and I slept with my pocket knife close as well. I debated leaving camp that night, but ended up staying and just leaving super early in the morning in case he came back. Now, normally while backpacking, I think the worst thing that could happen is I might run into a bear or sprain an ankle or something, and maybe this seems not that terrible as you're listening to it, but this truly was the most unsettling experience I've ever had in the backcountry. I don't know what this guy's deal was, but there was something really off about him. I'm sure that I'll be back out soon, but hopefully somewhere far away from that guy. This event happened last week. I was heading to my apartment after seeing a friend. I took the tramway at 11:30 p.m. because I didn't feel comfortable walking at night, and as soon as I sat, a man who was already sitting nearby came and sat in front of me. I got a very strange feeling about this guy, so I told my boyfriend by chat what was going on. Then I stood up to get out of the tram, but the man quickly got out after me. He was weirdly following me, not walking behind me, but sort of next to me. I was getting really anxious, knowing something was wrong, so I continued to walk to the avenue that I live in. I crossed the road and he didn't, so I thought that I was okay, but a few seconds after he crossed the road too and was walking behind me again. Then he passed me and was walking in front of me, so I thought that I was just getting paranoid and that he was just walking this way too. But near my building, he stopped and waited until I sort of came up to him. He asked me if I had a boyfriend, and my answer was, "Yes, sorry, good evening," as polite as I could. He proceeded to leave in front of me, so I was walking slower for him to be far enough away from me and to make sure that he didn't know that I was almost home. I turned into the little pathway heading to the lobby of my building, but obviously I was still anxious about this guy, even though he continued to walk. I thought that I had put my keys in my pocket, but they were in my bag, so I was sort of shaking so much that I tried multiple times to grab them, but just couldn't find them. Eventually, though, I did manage to get them out, and I opened the magnetic door, but thought of closing the door immediately after me in case the guy wanted to follow me. The door was closed, but the magnetic system wasn't on yet, and the man suddenly was running towards it and pushed it violently with horrific eyes looking at me. The door is made of glass, so I saw him, and that's when I knew that I was in real trouble. So without even thinking, I screamed as loudly as I could, and I think that's actually what saved my life in the end. Immediately, the guy ran at me, pushed me hard on the ground, and started to choke me really hard. I was too stunned because I wasn't prepared for such a violent assault. While he was choking me, I couldn't scream at all or even breathe, and nobody was coming, so I honestly thought that I was about to die, looking at his bulging eyes staring directly into mine with just pure hate. I am pretty small as well, so I wasn't really able to do anything with my arms at all. I think it wasn't that long, but it felt like a long time, and eventually I lost consciousness for a moment. When I opened my eyes again, he just ran out, and I saw the caretaker's wife beside me. The caretaker was chasing after this guy, but didn't manage to get him. He came back and called the police, and thankfully they caught this guy within 10 minutes, thanks to our description. I really still don't know why he did that to me as well, because when he attacked me, he didn't sexually assault me or rob me or anything like that, which would have been really easy to do at that point. I can't understand that his only goal was what seemed like to kill me. I'll forever be thankful enough to my caretaker who came to help me and probably saved my life, because nobody else in the building called the police or even tried to help. The man was before a judge about 3 days later and is in jail now, but denied everything, even if me and the caretaker identified him and that there was even video proof of him following me and everything. I am thankful to be alive after all of this, but it's something that has definitely affected me for the worse. So, I'm really not exactly sure what this was, but it sure as heck wasn't the wind, or a pipe making noise. This was something that tried to scare me and my partner at the time, and something that physically presented itself, and physically pulled on our clothing and hair. So, this all started when I put together a sofa bed in the spare room in our home. My partner was at work, so after building it, I had nothing better to do than play some games. Cat was staring down the hallway into the spare room. Not exactly unusual, but after some weird behavior from the cat, I thought that I'd have a look. What I can only describe as a black silhouette appeared and vanished within a few seconds. This wasn't actually that scary, to be honest, more just surprising, I suppose. But a few nights later, me and my partner both sat up after waking up in the dead of the night, as if we were waiting for something. It was as if the walls of the house were screaming a silent warning, just this eerie sense of anticipation for something dreadful. When all of a sudden, a very heavy dragging and clawing of the floor, very slowly, made its way down the hall and toward the bedroom. I was pulled up under the covers. This couldn't have been anything such as a household noise. There was just no way. And the cat was with us on the bed, so it definitely wasn't the cat. We sat there listening, and nothing ever came around the corner into our bedroom, but the sound seemed to stop just outside of the door. Over the next few weeks, strange things would happen too. As previously mentioned, our hair would be pulled, quick steps would make its way into the kitchen where we were and would come to a halt, as if something would be in the doorway just staring. We would return to the kitchen with every drawer and cupboard open. The big wide mirror in the bedroom would have handprints upside down on the top half of it. The last thing that happened was weeks after the last odd occurrence, though. I would sometimes stay up worrying about my partner. This was because they had breathing issues, heart issues, etc. Their breathing would slow down until it entirely stopped, before a massive breath would be taken and the loop would start up again. As I sat listening, and as the breathing slowed to almost a stop, a heavy, deep exhale came from behind me, almost horse-like. I later found out that my partner had the same thing happen twice to them and was too worried to tell me. The whole series of events isn't the first paranormal thing to happen to either of us, but sure as heck it's definitely the strangest. Whatever it was, though, it felt sinister, and thankfully it seemed to go away. The visitors would witness too many of the things mentioned, and some things smaller not mentioned as well. And I thought that I would give my experience to this community after hearing so many interesting stories here. I did try to get a recording of it once, in the dead of the night, to which my cat jumped at me, nearly giving me a heart attack, but thanks for listening, and thankfully, for now, it seems to be over, but if anything does happen again, I would really love to hear what your thoughts are, and what do you think I should do about it next time. Thanks. from Australia, and when I was 8 years old, my family lived in a house off the Pacific Highway. It backed off to bushland and had quite a large backyard, I suppose. But I used to play outside all the time because of this. One day I was outside as usual as well and heard my mum call my name, so I ran inside to see what she wanted, hoping that it was lunchtime. When I got there, she was busy washing up and she said, "Where are you off to in a hurry?" She had been watching me from the kitchen window, which overlooked the backyard. I said, "You called me in." She said that she hadn't called me in though, and that I must have imagined it. I just thought that she was messing with me at first and said, "Come on, Mum, why'd you call on me?" She stopped what she was doing and looked down at me and said, "Sweetie, I didn't call you. Maybe you just heard the neighbors yelling and it sounded like me." But I was adamant that it was her. It sounded exactly the same as the hundreds of other times that she called me. I started to get a little bit grumpy at this and said that it was definitely her. But she told me to go back playing and that lunch would be ready soon. This is when I started to cry and demand that she stop messing with me. Suddenly I had her attention and she asked why I was so sure that it was her. I told her the reasoning, that it sounded exactly like her. She eventually comforted me and convinced me that it must have just been my imagination. The next week went by as normal as well until one night I awoke to a tapping or a scratching noise. I looked around and when my eyes adjusted to the light, I couldn't see anything in my room, so I just assumed that it was an animal in the walls or the roof. Possums quite commonly come into the house for warmth and to nest in Australia, so I tried to get back to sleep. It went on though for what felt like maybe half an hour, so I looked around again and listened closely to the noise. And that was when I saw something in my peripherals at my window. I gazed over and saw what to this day still gives me chills. It was a thin figure, about 2 inches wide. It had elongated arms and fingers, all black and white eyes. It was tapping on my window while staring at me. I stared at it for a moment, not believing what I was seeing, thinking that I must just be dreaming or something. But for some reason I just felt like it was toying with me, like it was saying, "I'm coming to get you." Fear took over at that point. I stuffed my head under the blankets and I screamed as loudly as I could for my mum. I didn't stop screaming as well and didn't hear my mum come in, and when she grabbed the blanket to see what was wrong, I jumped back thinking that whatever the heck was outside my window had somehow got in. She asked me in a frantic sort of way what was wrong. I pointed over to the window and said, "That." But it was gone, and she asked me what it was. I explained what I had saw, slowly as I was trembling and could barely get the words out to describe it. She said that I could come and sleep in her room. I didn't get any sleep that night, nor the next few nights afterwards. I can still see the image in my mind as well as clear as the night that it happened, 18 years ago. It has made me afraid of the dark, and to this day I still sleep with the lights or the TV on. I've tried to rationalize it. I've tried to find answers in paranormal sightings, folklore, or dreamtime stories here. I thought I actually found the answer about 5 years ago when I learnt about Mimicking spirits. They resembled what I saw at first until I read it and it discussed with elders that they're sort of small and shy and are in no way harmful. Apparently they look after the land and don't like interacting with other beings, so obviously I crossed that off the list as a possibility. And to this day, I still have no idea what it was. But I have a feeling that it was the thing that called my name that time, mimicking my mother's voice. It's obviously made me think that it's much like a skinwalker. However, we really don't have any tales of those in Australia. The closest thing to that here is the bunyip, a shapeshifter that lives in billabongs and attacks passing travellers. Well, there's just no bodies of water nearby, so I also crossed that off. Obviously, I've thought that maybe it was all in my head, that my mother was right and it was just my imagination. Yet, still, the image is so strongly imprinted in my mind, as is the voice. To be completely honest though, I still have no idea if it was real or if it was something trying to lure me away or what it was. What I do know though is that I will remember it until the day that I die. Some friends and I had gone camping up a canyon in Utah. This was in 2020. Some creepy stuff had happened earlier in the night before I made it to the campground, so we were trying to relax, wind down, and have some fun like we had planned. We were in high school at this point, so we were doing stupid games like Truth or Dare and whatnot. It was me, 4 friends, and our friend's dog. Now, there was only one other group somewhat close to us, a couple and their dog, who set up their tent a few yards away from us. But they weren't close enough to interact with us at all. My friends and I were staying up and talking, laughing, etc. When at some point it sounded like someone's car alarm went off, maybe 5 or 10 miles up the canyon. The next campsite was pretty far away from ours. We didn't really question the sound and just went about talking until we noticed that the sound had gotten noticeably closer. It happened gradually, so we didn't notice it until it sounded like it was maybe even just a few yards away. The noisier that we were, the closer that it seemed to be getting to us. As we whispered amongst ourselves about what could be making the sound, it came closer and closer, and finally the noise was literally just outside of our tent, mere inches away from us. None of us dared speak or even move an inch in fear of compromising our safety. When we became quiet, so did the noise. After we were dead silent for a few minutes, the noise started up again and began to once again grow further away, until it sounded like maybe it was 10 miles away again. This happened in the span of like 10 or 20 seconds, mind you. But as the night went on, we would hear the noise travel around from campsite to campsite in almost no time at all. It didn't go away as well until about 3 a.m, and we tried to stay pretty quiet for the rest of the night. Now, whatever made this sound traveled the span of roughly 5 to 10 miles in the span of like 5 to 10 minutes. That's a whole mile per minute. It wasn't a vehicle because there were no engine sounds with it, and no headlights. It wasn't human because there was not a single footstep or twig crunch or anything, even when it was right outside of our tent. It made zero noise aside from just the beeping. It didn't sound like any animal any of us knew about, and it traveled way too fast and was much too loud to be any animal. Also, some other important details were that we originally thought the sound was either a vehicle or a machine of some kind, because of the consistent pattern of the beeping. However, when we stopped to listen to it for a while, there was a brief moment when the pattern got slightly off tempo, but it sounded sort of accidental, I guess, and quickly got back on the beat afterwards. This led us to believe that something was imitating the sound of a machine or a vehicle. We considered everything from nocturnal birds to pranksters with an air horn, but nothing really added up. We ended up waking up the next morning at 5 o'clock to just pack up and we left. The other campers who were sleeping a few yards away from us, they were already completely gone by the time that we were getting up. And this leads us to believe that whatever was messing with us that night had messed with them pretty bad too. I wish we could have seen our friend's dog's reaction to what happened, but he had already fallen asleep by 8 or 9 p.m, long before the beeping started. It started around like 11 or 12 at night. But I recently got together with those same friends that I camped with back then, and I brought up what happened that night. One of my friends too said that when the rest of us fell asleep, the same thing had happened again, but instead of a car alarm, the sound was a baby crying apparently, traveling at the same speed and distance as before, and according to her, it circled our tent a few times before fading off again. The people camping closest to us definitely didn't have a baby as well. Of course, I'm not 100% about this detail because I don't remember her telling us about it up until last week, and the experience happened like 2 years ago, so it may have been misremembered or something like that, but then again, I definitely was asleep when it supposedly happened. I do remember that much. Oh, and another notable detail too is that we were less than 50 miles away from Skinwalker Ranch. And if you know anything about that place, then you'll know that it is a really weird area.